The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good evening. This is the November 16th, 2020 Westminster City Council study session. We have 5 items on our agenda for tonight, plus comments from council. One of the 5 would be the update from our COVID materials. We'll go ahead and start with council. If you have any reports you'd like to present tonight, please let me know. Councilor Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last week, I had the privilege of attending the JEDC board meeting and health, I don't know what they call them, the health health institutions panel. Sorry, I'm short on words tonight. And so it was a great panel discussion about how the medical centers in our area are doing. The news was not great. Beds are full, staff is low, morale is bad. So it wasn't a very pleasant report, but definitely everybody tried to talk about how we could help them out. So the big message was everybody wear your masks. And I was pleased to report that in Westminster, 95% of our residents wear masks. So it's a great thing to be able to report out. And then we also elected our new board members. So that was our meeting for JEDC. And then last Thursday night, we had a Parks, Rec, Library, Open Space meeting. They also had an election for their new chairperson and their vice chair. And so I'm proud to announce that Wayne East will be the new chair, and Mary Litweiler will be, I think I said her name right, will be the new vice chair. They have a lot of work that they work on all the time. They're very, very busy. Paul Schmeeken came and presented on the sustainability plan, and they had a long discussion about that. They talked about the sculpture garden, recent dedication for I'm trying to think of, the Merchant, no, not the Merchant Marines, the young woman.
Coast Guard.
Thank you.
Yes, Coast Guard.
Coast Guard statue. And then in the near future, though, we'll also have the Armed Forces tribute and also the Merchant Marines. So we're looking forward to those 2 sculptures coming our way. And the construction is underway for the Children's Nature Playground at the TOD. and they are working very hard on social and financial recovery around COVID. They talked a lot about the mini grant program and the community grants. And they talked about the golf courses and the incredible use. So there's been record use of our golf courses since, I want to say June. Is that right, Jason? And over 700 people applied for paddle board permits last year. It's a huge number. In the prior years, they'd only had 150. So that was a huge uptick. And their next meeting will be in January. And that was pretty much it. They talked about bilingual translations for books in the library. They are working on establishing their subcommittees, increasing collaboration with other boards. And that was pretty much it. So it was a really good meeting. A lot is discussed in these board meetings. So I really encourage residents. These board meetings and these commission meetings are always open to the public. It's really important that if you are interested in being engaged as a citizen of our city, that you think about attending as a public person to these meetings. It's a great way to be involved and learn about what's going on in the city. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Scully. I really appreciate that update. I'm very excited about that nature playground, and I'm looking forward to the work on that. Last week on Monday, I participated in the CML policy statement working group. It was a diverse group of stakeholders working on updating CML's policy statement. It was very overdue, believe it or not. There's a lot of issues that we deal with all the time that the policy statement was mute on, such as alcohol and marijuana. So including those in that statement was important. On Thursday, I participated in the Metro Basin Roundtable. And during that meeting, they were focusing on grant applications. It was very neat. One of the grant applications actually is something that I believe Westminster had partnered on, along with a lot of municipalities, looking for a more accurate snowpack count using ASO technology versus just digging the holes for the snowdole reports that we all get. So it's always impressive to me, no matter what portion of local government we're working on. It seems like Westminster is always a leader. So it's impressed to see that. On Friday, I participated in a Colorado Communities for Climate Action pandemic working group on trying to look to minimize carbon impacts of restaurant heating. So basically recognizing that we need to support our restaurants and trying to figure out ways to stay open and have capacity through the pandemic, and how do we assist them in ways that are also minimizing impacts to carbon. And it was a wonderful conversation. I think the best thing we can do, there was not an appetite for regulations or rules, but perhaps through education, knowing the differences in tools, bulk purchasing, kind of looking at different creative ways that are supportive and incentivize, not punitive or regulate. So it was a very good conversation. As soon as I get the notes from that conversation, I will distribute them to council. I did distribute an article to senior executive team members and city council today. It was an article that was in the Colorado Sun detailing the impacts on the budget of climate change on local governments throughout Colorado this last year. And that's an issue I've talked about a lot while I've been on council, that climate action allows us to make sure we don't face shouldering undue burden of climate impacted or climate related expenses. So if you guys having a hard time going to sleep, you could read the article. It's a great one and I'd be happy to talk with any of you about it. Councilor Scully, in her report about Parks, Recs, and Open Space, mentioned kind of the value of open space that our residents have seen and the real uptick in usage. And with that being said, I've been delighted that in our budget that's gone through the first wave of approvals, I know we have a second reading, we have a lot more money for open space acquisition. I know we're having a fifth Monday conversation with council and we're looking for things to put on the agenda. I would like to put a conversation about open space acquisition if I have support from my colleagues on that item. And you can let staff, appropriate staff, Cody or Dawn know offline, but I would like to have that conversation. So we're strategic. And then finally, this was a really great agenda tonight. There's a lot that we're going to talk about, but there were two items that we received that were information only. And if staff will allow me, I was hoping we might be able to get a brief update on them. The first was in regards to our chief of police has come up with a new program, and it is just so timely and an issue that a lot of residents are curious about. And I think this is great. It's coming from the police department, and I was hoping he may indulge us and discuss a little bit of it with us. Is that all right?
Well, we can do that now and bring Chief Carlson and Dave Downing up, or you can finish your comments and we can do it after. What would be your pleasure?
I was hoping they could do it now so that we don't trap them for the full meeting. And then my second issue is the other information item, which you just referenced, Dave Downing.
Yeah.
I would like to go over that. I thought that was really important, the impact of comp plan changes from 2014 to present on our water resource budget. There's a lot of misinformation, and I thought that information only report really helped clarify it.
So for members of the public, we have information only reports that are on the agenda occasionally for council information, and these are always subject to if council would like more information or some comment on them. So Chief Carlson, if you would please, could you come up on the advisory panel program that you've started, and then we'll go to Dave Downing, our Community Development Director.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Tim Carlson, Chief of Police, and I'd be happy to address any questions or give some additional comment or background on where this program has come from. But it's actually been something I've been working on for several years, and really this time around it seemed like the right thing to do in engaging our community in a really different way. You know, Chiefs Advisory Panels, they're known by different names across the country. They're not a new concept, but they're certainly one that helps the Chief of Police in direct conversation with the members of the community, specific community, who are concerned with various issues, to talk with those with those folks directly with me. And it intrigued me from the beginning when I saw it. And we've been working on this actually for several months to pull it together. We're very excited that we finally had our first introduction meeting, and then the panel has asked to meet at least every other month, and so we're beginning that, and we'll have our next meeting in December. But I'd be happy to address any comments or questions other than that if you'd like.
I would just like to say thank you for your leadership on this. And then I was wondering, so it sounds like you've already met. Who are the members of the community that are on? Are you able to tell us the members that are on the panel?
So we have, if you'll notice, I've listed kind of some of the positions in the report that I thought were important to be on the panel. The specific people, that's a conversation we need to have with that group. I would like to eventually have those names publicized and folks aware of who they are. We just haven't gotten to that point on it yet. And so I don't want to be inappropriate in how we do it. That would be my preference, but we certainly have people from a wide variety of positions in our community, from school board members, superintendents to students, to business owners, small and large. We have representatives from our faith community, LGBTQ community, some demographics in different places in the community, to include geographic, because as council knows, the geography of the city often brings up different issues, whether it's in policing or other things. So we're working very hard geographically to make sure that the city is represented. So as far as specific names right now, I'd be a little hesitant until I've had a chance to talk a little further with the panel.
Well, please extend my appreciation for their service and their interest in providing this communication and dialogue with you. So thank you.
Certainly, thank you.
Mr. Downing, you got a comment?
I will. Good evening, council. I believe the Mayor Pro Tem was asking questions earlier today, actually, about impacts of the comprehensive plan update on our water supply. First, I'll advise council and anybody else who's listening that we actually have a presentation comp plan scheduled. I believe it would be a post-meeting item 1 week from tonight, if I'm not mistaken. So we can certainly get into much detail at that time if you have specific questions about impacts on the water supply. I can tell you very generally tonight that Andrew Spurgeon, our senior planner who is coordinating the comprehensive plan with staff from departments throughout the organization, works very closely with our colleagues in the Department of Public Works and Utilities to investigate that very matter about any changes in comp plan use, how that affects our. If council had any specific questions tonight, Andrew is on the line, or if you would prefer to wait till next week, we could go into very great detail at that time.
I'm fine deferring till next week, and I'll just memorialize my questions and ask them then.
Anything else, Ms. Sykes?
No, thank you, sir, and thank you for everyone for responding.
All right, Councilor Bowles.
Yeah, I just want to make a very brief report. Good evening, everyone. The Planning Commission met last Tuesday to discuss and have input on the sign code. So, we've already taken a look at that. Now it's with the Planning Commission, and they took a look at it, had input, and it is continuing to move forward. So I just wanted to update everyone to that about that meeting. Thank you.
Councilor DeMott.
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quickly, the Inclusivity Board met last week, and they got a report from Chief Carlson and Deputy Chief Reeves around some of what Chief Carlson already spoke about tonight as far as the advisory panel, and they came and gave them an update, and that group has obviously had some input with the department, and the PD's been working real closely with them over a couple different things over the last year, and so they took some time with the chiefs, and they also discussed their policing committee work that they've been working on and some recommendations that they plan to bring to council. And so I believe that they'll be working through staff to find a time when they can come and report their work back to us and make the recommendations that they came up with as a board. So we should be seeing that real soon. So it was a good, productive meeting.
Sorry, Mr. DeMott. Any other comments from council? No, you're not, Mayor Pro Tem. All right, council is the city manager.
Mr. Mayor, you're freezing up a little bit, at least you are for me. I don't have any report this evening. Thank you, members of council. We have a very full agenda. Again, always appreciate the time you give to our city. Thank you.
Mr. Frankel, I'm going to turn to you on item 1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dave Frankel, City Attorney. We may have a little slow connection here as well. Apologies if my voice gets garbled. But if your question, Mr. Mayor, is relative to the first item on the agenda, the presentation of the proposed revised oil and gas land use ordinance, Mr. Kaza has taken the lead, and we also are joined by our outside counsel, Elizabeth Paranjos. So I would defer and hand off to Mr. Kaza. Thank you.
Good evening, councilors. My name is Jacob Kaza. I'm a planner at the city's planning division. It is my pleasure to be presenting to you this evening. Tonight, I will be introducing the proposed revision to the city's oil and gas regulations. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. In the fall of 2018, City Council directed staff to analyze whether the city's existing oil and gas regulations met the needs of the city and its residents. The current regulations located in Westminster Municipal Code 11414 were adopted in 1997 and have not been modified since then. Over the course of the last 23 years, the oil and gas industry has expanded its use of technologies such as horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, which has changed how the industry operates. Also in 2018, the city received notice from the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission that an operator had filed for permits in and around Stanley Lake Regional Park. These applications, which have been withdrawn, highlighted some concerns that the community had regarding potential new oil and gas uses. Lastly, new state legislation has increased the city's ability to regulate oil and gas uses within our jurisdiction. The passage of Senate Bill 19-181, which amended the Oil and Gas Conservation Act, gives municipalities the authority to regulate the siting of oil and gas facilities. Next slide, please. The city attorney's office identified the regulations developed and adopted by the city and county of Broomfield as a good model for the city to follow in its drafting of revised regulations. Having regulations that are similar to our neighboring jurisdictions will create a more level regulatory field for operators when they are looking for locations for oil and gas facilities. The city has hired Elizabeth Paranjos of DeLone Law, Inc. to advise the city in its drafting of the new regulations. Elizabeth is with us tonight, and she will be available to answer questions that you may have after the presentation. Next slide, please. City staff from 4 departments were part of the core team that reviewed and helped draft the proposed regulations. The city departments include City Attorney's Office, Community Development, Parks, Recreation, and Libraries, and Public Works and Utilities. Staff from the fire department and the city's risk management team have also reviewed specific sections of the code on emergency preparedness plans and insurance and financial security requirements. Next slide, please. Over the next 3 slides, I will highlight a brief comparison of the proposed regulations against the city's existing regulations, the proposed COGCC regulations, the city and county of Broomfield regulations, and Adams County's regulations. The city and county of Broomfield adopted their increased setback in May of 2020 and are in the process of revising their oil and gas regulations now. Adams County adopted their regulations in the late summer of 2019. The COGCC is still in the process of rulemaking and has not yet finalized all the changes to the regulations which were mandated under Senate Bill 19-181. A larger comparison of the city's existing and proposed regulations is provided in attachment 2. One of the more significant changes staff is proposing is increasing the setbacks of oil and gas facilities from 350 feet to 1,000 feet. This is similar to what Adams County established last year. Broomfield has adopted a more restrictive setback of 2,000 feet. In the September release of the COGCC 600 series rulemaking, they are proposing a standard 2,000-foot setback with a set of conditions that could reduce the setback to 500 feet. So far, one of the most common public comments that have been received is the request to increase the setback to at least 2,000 feet. Staff are still looking into the setback and are considering increasing the proposed setback to at least 1,500 feet. Air quality is another area the staff is looking to enhance our regulations. Staff is proposing to establish air monitoring requirements that are very similar to what is required by both Adams and Broomfield. The COGCC and Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment will also be increasing their regulations around air quality. Next slide, please. Staff are also proposing creating protection zones to protect resources that are critical to our city. The first two are the Stanley Lake Source Water Protection Zone and the Woolman Creek Reservoir Protection Zone. The Stanley Lake Zone would exclude all oil and gas facilities from within the Stanley Lake bypass system. It is critical that we protect Stanley Lake from risks, as it is the sole drinking water source for the city of Westminster and some of our neighboring communities. The Woolman Creek Zone would exclude all oil and gas facilities from the Woolman Creek Reservoir System, which captures runoff from Rocky Flats. This reservoir system is critical to the city's water system, as it allows the city to monitor the runoff for plutonium levels and allows the city to divert unsafe water away from Stanley Lake as necessary. The habitat protection areas would designate land the city determines as having a high value and high quantity of wildlife and/or plant habitat. These areas include no nesting sites and habitat for threatened and endangered species, and include areas generally within 300 feet of a water body or water course on city-owned land. These areas can be modified in the future by city staff as habitat areas change over time. These new protections are shown in attachment 3. Next slide, please. In our last comparison, I will highlight some of the procedural changes we are proposing to the city's review process. The first is a new requirement that an operator go through a pre-application meeting before they can submit their application. The city requires this for all other development review in the city, and the new requirement is similar to what is required by both Broomfield and Adams County. The second is the requirement to notice the public. Staff is proposing a 2,640-foot notification radius, similar to both Broomfield and Adams County. The third requirement is an alternative site analysis. This would require an operator to provide 3 proposed locations for their facility at the time of their pre-application meeting. This will allow the city to help the operator find a location that best meets the approval criteria of the proposed regulations. This analysis is a standard requirement for the COGCC, Broomfield, and Adams County. Next slide, please. Together, the regulations create an overlay of areas that the city would consider not eligible for oil and gas facilities. In attachment 3, the city has compiled a map that shows the proposed 1,000-foot setback, the protection zones, and habitat protection areas. The map does not show the setbacks from buildings outside the city's municipal limit, as those buildings have not been mapped in the city's GIS. The map also does not reflect the regulations from federally owned lands or the COGCC and is provided only as an informational graphic. Next slide, please. Staff presented these proposed regulations to the Planning Commission on October 27th and to the Environmental Advisory Board on October 28th. Both boards provided comments about the regulations, and they are surmised in the agenda memo. Next slide, please. Following the presentation tonight and any additional public comments that are received, staff will revise the regulations as needed. One of the comments staff received from the Environmental Advisory Board was that staff should allow more time for public comment. To address this comment from the board, staff are pushing back the formal review and consideration of this ordinance to a future meeting in the first quarter of 2021. This proposed schedule may be modified as needed to accommodate proposed changes to the draft regulations and to address additional comments. The city firmly believes in public outreach and for residents to be able to have a voice in their community. An informational website has been developed for the update to the oil and gas regulations. This website will continue to be updated throughout the review process. Staff have provided notice of the update through the weekly and will be providing notice in the next edition of the city edition. The best way for a resident or interested party to provide feedback is by contacting me directly. My contact information is provided on this slide and is up on the website. Next slide, please. Staff believes that the proposed oil and gas regulations as currently drafted protect and minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, and welfare and the environment. Thus, the proposed regulations support the visionary leadership, effective governance, and proactive regional collaboration city strategic plan goal. The process to adopt this code and review future oil and gas facilities will involve significant community engagement, which supports the vibrant, inclusive, and engaged community goal. Measures taken to ensure that oil and gas facilities have minimized adverse impacts to the community and the environment satisfy the beautiful, desirable, safe, and environmentally responsible city goal. The regulations would allow the development of oil and gas facilities while also protecting existing businesses and the community, which ensures the dynamic diverse economy goal is met. Increasing the review fee and adding a provision to collect fees for third-party monitoring and reviews ensures that the financially sustainable government providing excellence in city services goal is met. Thank you for your attention, and the city staff would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, are you still on? Team, it appears that we may have lost the mayor. I'm going to call a brief recess until he can get back on.
These regulations would not have affected that. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, I think we missed all of what you had to say. You were cut out during that.
Can you hear me now?
Breaking up, but yes.
As
Mr. Mayor, I suggest we take a brief break and you restart and get back on perhaps. Mr. Williams, could you reach out to the mayor for assistance?
Matt is not here. This is Jody. I
I
can go.
apologize, Jody.
That's all right. I can go ahead and I can put this on a short break. I will have to run upstairs. I'm in the basement, so it'll take me a few minutes to run up there. If you guys are okay with that, I'm more than happy to.
Mayor Pro Tem, maybe a 5-minute break would help.
Yes, I'm going to call a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jody, this is Barbara. I don't believe he's in the City Hall building.
Where is he at tonight?
His home.
Oh, I do not have his phone number. I could call and see if I could help him from afar.
Jody, I'll send you his contact information in an email.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Excuse me, this is Jody. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm letting you know I spoke with the mayor. He is driving in. I have sent him a call-in number with access, the access number to get in if he wants to call in on his cell phone. He said he is driving his way here as fast as he can get here safely.
All right, well then we will have an extended break. I would say probably 15 minutes, or do we want to continue with this item without the mayor? It would seem this is an important enough issue that we want to have all members of council present, in my opinion. I'll poll the rest of council. With that said, then I think we'll recess for, do we check back in 15 minutes? Lives
Okay.
pretty darn close to City Hall.
Okay, so let's say what, 7:20? That's like 13 minutes from now?
Okay, we'll check in at 7:20.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Or do you think it should be later, City Manager Tripp?
Yeah, I just think he's coming from City Park area. That's going to be 7:25 probably.
Okay, we'll do 7:25. See you all back then. All
Thank
right.
you. Can't hear anything. No.
Thank you. All right, thanks, guys.
Glad to have you back, Mr. Mayor. We underestimated how quick you would be, or so I believe they
Do
still
not
have
tell
another.
anybody how quickly I got here.
I do believe the chief is on the line, so
You'll have to turn a close eye somewhere else. Actually, I think you guys have got the date all wrong. I think this is Friday the 13th, not Monday the 16th. What time are you reconvening?
7:25, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Mayor.
Hello, Catherine.
Good to see that you made it.
Well, I'm not going to tell you how long I've been here.
You always told me to go the speed limit.
I tell a lot of people that. All right, Ms. Parker, do we have everybody back on from staff side?
It looks like we do, sir.
All right, thank you. My apologies, council and staff and those who are tuning in. Once my system started going, it just snowballed and got worse. So my only way to get out of the house and get here to City Hall. Mayor Pro Tem, where did you leave off when I lost you?
Mr. Mayor, we felt it was a valuable conversation and wanted to include you for the entirety of it. So we actually, you were the first to ask a question and none of us heard it.
Okay. So Mr. Scathen, my question going back to the Rocky Flats issue. The site locations that were proposed by the contractor one time to be drilled on the Rocky Flats property, that is west of Indiana, would not have been affected by the ordinance or the activities that we're doing tonight. Am I correct?
Mr. Mayor, I can answer that question. Unless Dave Franco wants to jump in.
No, Mr. Kaza, please go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, that's correct. The city under Senate Bill 19-181 does not have the authority to regulate outside of its municipal boundaries. So there is no regulation we could put in place that would affect the Rocky Flats property because it's entirely outside of the city's jurisdiction.
Is that true of only surface, or does that also include below the surface?
Yeah, so on below the surface, this also in Senate Bill 19-181, the city municipalities were only given the authority to regulate above ground activities. So specifically, if it was like the direction of a horizontal drill bore, we would not have the authority to tell them which direction to send it.
Okay. To my understanding, other than the site that was at 140th and Huron, which has now been demolished, it's capped off, tanks and everything are gone. We don't have any active wells in the city of Westminster at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Council, does anyone have any questions? If you do, please put it back in the chat because when I got off, I lost all of you. Councilor Scully?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, staff, for the presentation. I appreciated reading through the regulations. I appreciated that in most cases we met the state regulation. It didn't seem like we went beyond it. Like it looked kind of like we just brought our regulations straight up to the state, except for the setbacks, which I was kind of surprised were actually a little less than the state regulations, and definitely less than some of our surrounding cities. And so I was curious as to what the thinking was behind that.
Councilor Scully, this is Dave Frankel. I'm glad to start the answer, but then I'll look to Mr. Kaza and Ms. Paranjos if they're willing. But generally, the Senate Bill 19-181 allows cities to regulate oil and gas activity, but it does not permit cities to ban oil and gas activity. And a large enough setback, the risk there is that it could be a de facto ban. And so we want to be sensitive to the amount of a setback that we require so that our regulation is within the scope of our authority and is not a ban. So I would ask perhaps Ms. Paranjos if you could expand upon that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Frankel. I'd be happy to. So Councilwoman Scully, I do think there are a number of provisions where the regulations actually go beyond what the COGCC adopted. First, the order of operations in terms of when this draft was initially drafted and the COGCC started its mission change rulemaking. We actually started drafting these regulations prior to the COGCC starting its mission change rulemaking. I will say it's really kudos to the current COGCC that in drafting their regulations as part of the mission change rulemaking, they relied heavily on what local governments had already done, including the city and county of Broomfield, which was kind of the template that we used for crafting these. So to some extent, what the state has actually done has come up to the stringency that was contained in the draft city and county of Broomfield draft regulation, and is also in this draft regulation. There are definitely some provisions that go beyond the current state requirements, in particular some of the air quality provisions. But certainly I think if there are specific provisions where you are looking for enhanced protections, I'm sure that staff would be more than happy to look at those. And certainly we're open to public comment as well on those particular provisions.
So I guess I am. I'm looking for a more stringent protections, regulations on our setback. I believe we set it at 1,000, and I think it was the city and county of Broomfield, if I recall the slide. They set it at 2,000 and then a 500 additional feet in certain circumstances. And I would just be more comfortable if we came up to that standard as well. And I was concerned because it looked like there was consideration of allowing our open space to be used as well. And I think I didn't know if I was reading that correctly, but that concerned me. I don't want our open space to be used for or to be considered for oil and gas use at all. I think that's land that we have the responsibility to preserve and to protect. I also was really concerned when I was reading through it. I didn't see any addressing really, and maybe I missed it because it was a lengthy document. There was a lot of detail and there was a lot of legal speak in it. But I didn't see either any restrictions on vibrations. I saw restrictions on noise. I saw restrictions on setbacks. I saw restrictions on air quality, but I didn't see anything on the vibration that often are a part of the impact of oil and gas drilling. So I guess those were some of my concerns reading this. Is I understand we can't ban it, but I want to make sure that we put as much regulation as we possibly can into place to really protect our residents and to ensure the quality of our city. And I have one more question. It is my understanding that we have a certain depth that into the ground that we can protect. Does anybody know what that depth is? Because I know that when we were dealing with Stanley Lake and Rocky Flats, 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, when we had somebody who had taken a permit out and the permit was actually on the Jefferson County land across the street, which was not in our municipality boundary, but we couldn't do anything about them drilling under us, and because they were so many feet down. Do we have a certain depth that we have regulation over, or is it just the surface, like 3 inches down, and that's it? That's as far as we can regulate. So those are my questions and concerns. I just want to make sure that we're doing our utmost to protect our residents in our city, and protecting our environment here in Westminster. Our parks and people live here because they love the open space. We need to really protect that.
Ms. Brandos, do you have a response?
Sure, absolutely. So I think we can certainly look at potentially additional regulations to address vibrations. As you heard from your city attorney, there are some restrictions with respect to what local governments can regulate. And so setting a 2,000-foot setback may in fact prohibit all oil and gas development within the city and county of Broomfield, just the way that those setbacks are measured, which could be a de facto ban. So that's a concern, and that's something that the staff has been looking at closely. Your question about any authority over subsurface. So at least with respect to SB 19-181, what the General Assembly did is they gave local governments the ability to regulate surface impacts related from oil and gas development. That does not necessarily mean that there are no subsurface impacts, for example, groundwater contamination, that are outside the scope of local government authority, because there are other enumerated powers given to local governments in SB 19-181, specifically the authority to regulate water quality. But I'm not aware of any specific number of subsurface land that is within the realm of local government authority. Certainly that is not part of SB 19-181. You referenced something that predated the legislation last April, so perhaps that's some other authority, but as far as I'm aware of, there is no authority that gives local governments authority over a specific amount of subsurface land.
Okay.
So can you at least put that on your issue to go back and check?
Certainly happy to. I'm happy to. And the one thing I guess I just did want to stress is,
in SB 19181 did significantly expand local government's authority with respect to regulating surface impacts related to oil and gas development. And so, to the extent that council wants your regulations to be as protective as possible, you now have much more authority to protect public health and the environment from impacts than you previously did. And I believe it is staff's intent to try and exercise that authority to the fullest extent legally possible.
Thank you.
Councilor Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was answered, but I just wanted clarification. Looking at the map, and I know it's a rudimentary map on the GIS system overlay, but by having 1,000-foot setback, we effectively have taken out 98% of the landmass in Westminster as it is, and it looks like we may have one fraction of the dog park off of Sims and then one other corner, but that's just 1,000-foot setback. So I wanted to clarify, looking at that map, in that green area and then the protected areas, we've pretty much eliminated all but the dog park off of Sims, if I'm looking at that correctly.
Councilor Seymour, I can answer that for you as well. This is Jacob Kaza, the planner with community development. On the 1,000-foot setback, there's about 6 locations that could potentially be drilled under the city's regulations. That's not considering that an operator still has to comply with the COGCC regulations. So the COGCC, with their what we call a soft setback at 2,000 feet, would also apply. And then there are conditions where they could get that could be reduced down to 500 feet. So even with that 1,000-foot setback, it does restrict to about 5 or 6 locations in the city. At the 1,500-foot setback, there's 2 locations in the city, being the Westmore Technology Park and the Westminster Hills open space. At 2,000 feet, there's about a lot smaller area in Westmore Technology Park and even smaller area of the Westminster Hills Dog Park. The one, we did receive some questions and some comments about changing the setback to the property line. That would still allow places to drill. Unfortunately, because the city of Westminster is just so built out, and we have taken the steps to preserve large, vast areas of natural open space as city-owned open space. Really the only place that meets these setback criteria is the city's open space, and primarily it's Westminster Hills open space. So the Councilor Scully asked the question as to whether we could ban it or remove it from the city's open space. I think that would effectively eliminate drilling, the potential for drilling within the city of Westminster. And because of the restrictions of the city not being allowed to ban it, that could be construed as a ban. If we didn't allow them to drill within 2,000 feet of any structures, and we didn't allow them to drill within the open space, that could essentially block off drilling from any location within the city.
Councilor Seymour, does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro
That
Tem.
does, thank you.
So I want to start by saying thank you to city staff and to Ms. Paranos for your work on this. I really appreciate your willingness to extend the conversation so we can have more public input. My guess is there's quite a few folks watching this tonight. This has become an issue that a lot of our residents have reached out to many of us on with concerns. It's very topical, and there's a lot of concern out there in regards to it. And there's been a lot of chatter on social media as well. I do have some questions, and I do appreciate that we have strengthened this from beyond what the state recommendations or what the current COGCC rules are, recognizing they're not complete with their rulemaking process. But similar to other council members, I've heard from numerous members of the community and have been concerned myself about the departure from the 2,000-foot setback. My understanding from the presentation tonight is while the state has that 2,000-foot setback, there's many instances that could limit that to only 500 feet. Is that accurate? And can you give examples of what that would be?
I'd be happy to. That is accurate. So the COGCC finalized a 500-foot hard setback, meaning that is a firm setback. The 2,000-foot setback, the chairman of the commission referred to that as a soft setback. And that's because there are 3 provisions that allow an operator to basically obtain a waiver from that 2,000-foot setback and therefore locate a facility within the 2,000-foot setback. And then there's also an opportunity, and I'll go through those options and those waiver options. There's also the ability of an operator to seek a variance from the 2,000-foot setback at a hearing before the full commission. So the waivers can occur if, for example, the operator is able to obtain the consent from impacted tenants and homeowners that are within that 2,000 feet. So if all the impacted tenants and homeowners agree that they're okay with an oil and gas facility being located less than 2,000 feet from their property, then the operator can go ahead and submit an application to the COGCC for a location within 2,000 feet of a home without obtaining a variance from the commission's rules from the full commission. Similarly, if the actual working pad boundary is less than 2,000 feet, but the structures within that boundary, specifically the tanks and the wellheads, the stationary structures, are further than 2,000 feet, that also triggers a waiver. So that's another option. And then third, if the oil and gas facility, the pad, is part of a comprehensive area plan, which is basically a situation where the COGCC will approve of multiple well sites within a broader geographic area, then again, that's an opportunity for the operator to seek a waiver from that 2,000-foot setback. If none of those apply, as I mentioned, the operator can still go before the full commission and basically request that the commission waive the 2,000-foot setback on a case-by-case basis. So that's why it's called a soft setback, which isn't to say that it still isn't a setback, but there are opportunities for a location to be built within that 2,000 feet of a home.
And I recognized through Mr. Kaza's report that the 1,000-foot setback that is being proposed to us tonight is still in some level of flux, that there's conversations about potentially extending it. But I'd like to understand, as it's described to us right now, is this a firm setback, or would there be similar options at the local level for waivers or for variances?
Mayor Pro Tem Sites, I can answer. This is Jacob Kaza from the Planning Division. So the 1,000 foot is basically a starting point for the conversation. Really, we needed to propose something to City Council and to the community and get an understanding. Looking at the 2,000 foot setback, we did notice that it basically was looking as though the city was trying to ban it outright. As Councilor Seymour pointed out, there's really only 2 locations that are left at 2,000 feet. At 1,500 feet, we didn't see much of a change in the amount of land that would be available from the 1,000 foot. So we started the conversation at 1,000, and we're definitely still listening to the community, and we want to listen to the City Council as well before we bring a final ordinance back with a setback to City Council. So we're still looking for input on that as well. In regards to a variance process for the local level, the proposed ordinance does include a specific variance procedure for oil and gas regulations. The ordinance would give the Planning Commission final authority over an oil and gas official development plan. And during that process of the public hearing of that official development plan, the operator could request a variance from any of the standards, and the Planning Commission would be responsible for reviewing that variance as a part of that ODP public hearing and granting it or denying it.
And so one of the variances that they could apply for could in fact be less of a setback. Is that correct?
That is correct, Councilor.
All right. So that's interesting. Just for a background for people who are maybe listening as to why I'm going to be asking a few questions. Westminster is currently members of Colorado Communities for Climate Action and has been for some time. And when this was passed, I was the president of Colorado Communities for Climate Action and worked on this bill, specifically wanting to expand the role of local government, making sure that we had a say in our own land use decisions. And subsequently, even this year, have testified in front of the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, not as on behalf of this, or not on behalf of the city of Westminster, but just on behalf of myself as a resident, wanting to make sure we have stringent rules. One of the rules that was changed was in regards to COGCC, the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, making sure they prioritized public health, safety, and welfare for the environment and wildlife in their rulemaking and approval process. I would like to see something similar for our planning commission. When they're reviewing this, making sure that it is explicit that that's how they should be prioritizing their decision. Is that possible?
Councilor Seitz, I can answer that. This is Jacob Kaza again. So specifically for the oil and gas regulations, there is, I'm trying to find the specific section so I can quote it to you directly. Specifically for when the Planning Commission is making their findings on whether to deny, modify, or approve that, they specifically have to cite the code standards on approval of those. And they're specifically about the application must minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, and welfare of the environmental resource. And then it explains what that means. And then it cites every single section and standard underneath of it. So specifically, the thing that the Planning Commission would do is say that their ODP meets that standard, and that standard is the way to minimize the adverse impact. So it is specifically listed out as the reason for why they would approve or deny something, and it listed specifically as minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources.
Thank you. One of the things, going back to setbacks real quick. And I am obviously not a public health expert on this, but I have heard that the reason 2,000 feet is what we are, here and what maybe Broomfield chose and the state has as their soft setback is because there's public health studies that show that's the distance that's recommended for air quality. What I'm confused by is if the distance is determined based off of public health impacts, why we would want to do less than that. And I recognize you've been very clear, and I understand we cannot do a de facto ban. But by stating that there's 2 sites and an opportunity for variances, is it a de facto ban? Is 2 sites meaningfully less than 6? If we're using a public health as our reasoning.
Mayor Pro Tem Seitz, I'd like to direct that to Elizabeth Parenhos or Dave Frankel.
Sure. I'm happy to take a stab at that. So I think the important thing to remember about oil and gas locations is each oil and gas facility can be constructed differently. So while setbacks is certainly one way to protect public health from air emissions or from odor or noise, for example, or truck traffic, there are other ways to protect public health, specifically the design of the facility. So for example, it is now quite common practice on the Front Range to design new facilities with very low emitting stationary sources, which dramatically reduce the amount of air contaminants that are emitted from those facilities. It's also possible to install continuous air quality monitoring so that the citizens can know always, every day, what the air contaminants are that are being emitted from that facility. And then, of course, there's various ways to reduce noise and reduce odors, including building sound walls around the facilities during the pre-construction activities, pre-production activities. And so I think, part of the rationale for the soft setback in the COGCC rulemaking, and part of the new authority that local governments have, quite honestly, is on a case-by-case basis, coming up with a suite of best management practices, as well as looking at the location to get an overall picture of, does locating this particular facility with this particular design and these particular best management practices, does that still protect public health, safety, and the environment? And so a setback is one tool in a suite of many.
That definitely helps. But I want to just, I heard you, so please don't feel like I'm discounting everything you just said. Broomfield does have a 2,000-foot setback, and I have a two-part question. Is that a soft setback or is that a hard setback? And secondly, if our neighbor has a hard setback of 2,000 feet and directional drilling is not something that's within our purview to regulate, does that create an incentive to locate in Westminster potentially? Do you see what I'm saying by having that discrepancy in setback? Could there be, the end result would be that we become easier to cite in?
Right. So yes, Broomfield's setback it's a hard setback. There are variance provisions in the Broomfield Ordinance, but it's not set up the way the COGCC setback is, where there's waiver opportunities, for example, from impacted landowners. So it's harder in that sense than the COGCC setback. I would say that when an oil and gas company is determining where to locate a facility, the first thing that they're looking at is, where are the minerals, right? First, they have to get a drilling and spacing unit. They have to get leases. That's sort of the first order of priorities. And so once they've determined that, then there is some leeway, certainly with respect to where the surface pad can go because of directional drilling and horizontal drilling. But I would be surprised, quite honestly, if the fact that one jurisdiction has a 2,000-foot setback and the neighboring jurisdiction has a 1,500, even a 1,000-foot setback would cause sort of a race to the bottom scenario where the oil and gas companies are all rushing to drill in the jurisdiction with the lesser setback, because that isn't the factor that is going to determine where they want to put their well pad. They're going to put their well pad in the place where it's best for them to access their minerals, and certainly cost is a factor. But in every instance now, with all local governments, they have to get approval from the local government. So they know if they're coming to Westminster, they have to meet your regulations, which it's not just setbacks, right? There's a number of different provisions that they have to meet as well. Same with Broomfield. So personally, no, I don't actually think that having a lesser setback in Westminster than your neighboring local government will create sort of a race for operators to locate pads in Westminster over Broomfield.
My concern isn't so much a race. I think the mayor brought up a good point. We don't have a lot of active wells. While I've been on council over the last 7 years, there's really been interest just once, which was terrifying, next to Rocky Flats and at Stanley Lake, our drinking. But the concept I'm talking about is we saw the difference in setbacks within our community, 1,000 to 2,000, and how many sites that eliminated. With Broomfields, could it potentially eliminate so many sites that, regardless of where the geologic play is, they're forced almost by the fact that we have more lenient setbacks in order to hit that play to be, and we abut Broomfield to come into us. So it's not that I think it'll be a race, but it potentially could make the difference in one project penciling out or not. Do you think that that's an impossible scenario? Because I guess to me, and I don't see it as an impossible scenario.
So if one jurisdiction was able to ban oil and gas and the neighboring jurisdiction was not able to, then I could see your hypothetical playing out, right? Because then an operator cannot go in one jurisdiction. So therefore they're forced into the other. That isn't the world we live in right now. No jurisdiction can ban oil and gas. So all oil and gas operators are going to have to look at each jurisdiction's first, where are the minerals? Second, where can they get leases? Third, how can they still cite something and comport with the state regulations and the local regulations? So I suppose my answer is the same, which is I don't think that the setback will sort of cause oil and gas operators to locate in Westminster if it's not something they would otherwise try to do.
Okay. My next question is about building envelope versus property line. And so when I was, I'm also on the Colorado Municipal League's policy committee, and we had a long conversation there in wanting to support a bill that was going to change the way setbacks were measured to the property line. And one of the big arguments is that oftentimes properties that have a lot of activity on the property line, not just within the building envelope, are schools. And I believe in Weld County, there was a specific example of an oil and gas drilling site being very close, complying, right, with the setback requirement of the time at the COGCC, but being very proximate to the playground where children were playing. And so I think from a public health perspective, to me, especially on highly activated properties, it would make much more sense to have the setback from the property line rather than the building envelope. So I guess that's more a preference. If there is a strong staff concern on that, I'd love to hear a response. And I'm not hearing one, so I'm going to assume. Okay.
Jacob Kaza again. No, we don't really have a strong preference at that. Actually, I was looking through the maps again today to try to determine how a 2,000-foot setback from a property line would affect it. And again, our primary concern here is because we're so built out, it's about, does the setback create a de facto ban on drilling in the city? I don't think that if we changed it to a property line, and we'll have to work on the wording on that specifically, I don't think that would really change the locations very much at Westminster Hills open space. I think it would potentially, depending on how we word it, it could eliminate any drilling on the location and Westmore Technology Park. But no, I don't think the staff has a strong feeling on it, but it's something we could definitely look into further and consider adding.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I wanted to touch base with financial assurances. We've heard horror stories about abandoned wells that have caused very acute impacts to public life, like to residents' life and livelihood. I did not see in there, do we require, and can we by 181, I apologize for my ignorance on the bill, require, like, I don't know if surety bonds are the right words, but something that would be of enough financial oomph that if they were to abandon the well, it would allow for cleanup. So not something that is woefully below what it would actually take to properly close the well.
I can answer that as well. Mayor Pro Tem Sides, this is Jacob Kaza again. Currently in the regulations that we have drafted, there's not specifically financial assurance for plugging and abandonment of a well. There are other municipalities that are looking at that as a requirement. I do have a copy of the Commerce City proposed regulations, and that's something that we're looking into still. The estimates that we've seen can range anywhere from $90,000 to $300,000. It's largely determined based off of the size of or how deep the well is, how long of the well bore length. And then there's some distinction to be made because each individual well while there can be multiple wells located on each individual oil and gas facility, there could be up to 12 or more on a location. Each one of those wells has a separate cost associated with plugging and abandoning it. So it's something we're looking into. It would probably take the form of a surety bond. But one of the concerns we have with that is whether that's actually financially feasible for a company to put one of those up, because the cost of say a $100,000 surety bond over the lifetime of a well, whether that's 20 years or 60 years, might not be financially feasible for any company to actually provide that surety bond. So that's one thing we're still looking into.
I would be less concerned if there hasn't been a pattern and practice of wells being abandoned and there being a real harm to the public. And so my goal is definitely not to be punitive or arbitrary, but really trying to figure out a way that ensures in the event of insolvency of a company that our residents aren't the one that are imperiled by that. So that's my goal in asking that question. And so I think it would be well worth the research to see what are considered best practices and what are appropriate. So those are my questions for now. I do want to say thank you for being on top of this. I mean, I think Westminster really got ahead of this, worked, I believe, in conjunction, and I keep mispronouncing your last name, Ms. Paranos, is that correct? I did it wrong. I know I did.
It's Paranos. That's okay. The H is pronounced like a Y, but it's fine.
Paranos. I apologize. I do appreciate all of your work and dedication in making sure that these are both enforceable within the scope and spirit of the law. My goal is to protect the health and welfare of our community members. So thank you for indulging my questions, and I hope that's provided some direction as well.
Councilor Vols.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And a lot of my questions have been already answered or discussed, but so I'll try to be as brief as I can. But I first want to start by thanking staff. A lot of staff have been involved, and when Mr. Kaza showed the slide, there were a lot of staff who've had input. So thank you to our team for that. But I also want to thank the Environmental Advisory Board members and Planning Commission members. They also had meetings that had a similar hearing to this and had a lot of questions and a lot of good input. So thank them for their time, and they've also reached out to us as council members. So I want to thank them for that. So the Planning Commission, as I understand, will serve as the approving body. So it will not come to council. I just want to confirm that. Is that correct?
Councilor Vose, this is Jacob Kaza again. Yes, under the proposed draft ordinance, the oil and gas official development plan would be approved by Planning Commission. I would like to just clarify that it does still, in city code, there's still a provision where city council could do a de novo vote and call that up if they wanted to make a separate ruling on that ODP.
Oh, okay, that's a good answer. Thank you. I was actually curious about that. And then I also want to follow up with Mayor Pro Tem Sites. I think we need to, I think you said earlier, and I just want to confirm that issues like public health and safety and environment, wildlife resources are part of the determining factors that the Planning Commission will use when they make a decision. Is that correct? That it's already in code? I didn't see it in there, but it may be in there. What is that a fact?
Yeah, Councilor Vols. Specifically, it's on page 17 of attachment 1 under subsection G of Westminster Municipal Code 11414. There's a paragraph there, and it allows a lot more on how they approve it, and specifically lists out minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, and welfare, and the environment and wildlife resources, which is important to be our approving or our reason to approve or deny an application, because that's specifically the language out of Senate Bill 181.
Good. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And thanks for confirming that for me. If we do I think you already talked about this, I guess that I won't talk more about it, but it seems to me that we would want to do 1,000 feet. We're going to do 1,000 feet because 2,000 is considered a de facto moratorium. If we do, I think it should be from the property line. And I don't know how that affects, but I just want to weigh in on that and say I believe it should be from the property line. If we have it from habited buildings, which it says now, 1,000 feet, you go to an elementary school, and then then out from there is the playground. It seems to me like we might have some issues like that we need to look at. So I would encourage us to look at the and let us know if that's not possible. But I would encourage property line versus habited building. So. And then also, along with Councilor Scully, I would like to see us not have these facilities on our open spaces and in our parks. I would prefer to not see that. So I would put my, like Councilor Scully, kind of put my 2 cents worth on that as well. So, and then I have a question. When we do public notices for these facilities, and then we do the pre-application process, there's notification goes out. In our proposed ordinance, will it have tenants included, or is it only owners of the properties?
Councilor Vols, I can answer that again. Jacob Kaza. As the draft is right now, it says to the owners of the property. That matches the language inside of our other public hearing criteria in 11.5 of the Westminster Municipal Code. We did receive public comment, and specifically from the Environmental Advisory Board, where they urged us to change that to include tenants of the property as well. Certainly, it's something we could change, and if there's a plurality on council who wants that, we can definitely include that.
Yeah, I would support that. And what about lessees of or lessees of businesses that? How are they notified? If you say you don't own the building, but you're located there, your employees are located there, how are they notified?
Probably the best way to do that would be to treat them as all tenants and just have the operator address their notice to every single address within that certain distance boundary. So it would be applied to all the suites as well.
Okay, good. Thank you for that answer. I would support that. I think this is a public health safety issue that I think those folks they need to hear that. I really believe they need to be made aware of that and have an opportunity to weigh in on it. So I would support tenants and lessees and however you word that, I think that should be included. And then I also believe we should, along with Mayor Pro Tem Sites, I was going to mention this as well, surety bonds. If we've just had such a tremendous problem with that throughout the state, not being capped off properly. I don't want our taxpayers and our residents to foot the bill for corporations that just jump out of there. I don't think that's the proper way to do this, and I don't think it's the proper way for our taxpayers to have to foot that bill. So I would prefer us to require some form of surety bond on these facilities. And then finally, I don't know if this is even appropriate to ask or even bring up, but as far as timing, is this the right? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of wheels turning, legal wheels turning. What went into the thought? So I support this, and we need to do it. But is there other opportunities to do a moratorium for a certain number of months, and then we look to see what the legal landscape is? Is it more clear cut later on, or is that not the case at all? So I would like to know if we did some form of a moratorium now, with the consideration we come back and revisit this. Is that or is that also a legal liability that's beyond the pale?
Councilor Vols, I'd like to direct your question on the legality of a moratorium to Mr. Frankel, if I can.
Mr. Frankel, you got a response?
Thank you, Mr. Kaza. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Relative to enacting a moratorium locally, I don't know that staff has a recommendation to enact a moratorium at this time. I know that other municipalities and cities and counties, for that matter, have extended moratoria in their areas, perhaps where they have more active drilling occurring. But at this time, I don't know that there is a staff recommendation to consider a moratorium within Westminster. Ms. Paranjos, would you be willing to add to the considerations relative to enacting moratoria?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, I mean, certainly it is within local government's authority to enact a moratoria. Other local governments have moratoria in place, as Mr. Frankel just mentioned, including the city and county of Broomfield, the city of Lafayette, Boulder County. I would say staff has not considered that yet, so I think that's certainly something that we can discuss, but you do have the authority to enact a moratorium for a limited amount of time.
And when you say limited amount of time, what would that be? 3 months, 6 months, a year, 12 months? What would that look like?
So certainly anything up to a year is well within your authority for the purpose of updating regulations. For example, moratoria after that, it is a bit of a case-by-case analysis depending on the circumstances. Up to 5 years, at least a 5-year ban or a 5-year moratoria was struck down by the Colorado Supreme Court in a case that was brought against the city of Fort Collins. So 5 years is too long. 1 year is definitely okay. Something in between, there hasn't actually been litigation regarding those particular timeframes.
Okay, well, good. Well, thank you for those answers. And again, thank you to everyone who worked on this. A lot of work obviously went into it and answering our questions. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Councilor Demott.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation and all the various questions from my colleagues. I have a couple of quick things I'd like to ask. One, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but why is it going to the Planning Commission and not us? And why is there not a next stop unless we call it up to council?
Jacob.
Yeah, Councilor Demott, this is Jacob Kaza again. One of the things that we had as a consideration was if an operator meets all of the requirements under the ordinance, they meet all of the regulations, then it effectively means the city has to grant the ODP. If they don't, then the city, has the ability to deny it. And so this city staff kind of see it as it's similar to a regular ODP that the Planning Commission already has authority to approve without review by City Council. And that was one of the main driving reasons why we thought this would be a regulation or an area that the Planning Commission has the knowledge and has the ability to make this decision. And we thought it would be a good way to save time necessarily for applications that clearly meet all of the standards and not having to go through 2 public hearings with the community for that process, just so that way the operator would still get the yes vote if they met all of the standards clearly. Again, that's not set in stone. If the city council feels that they should be the final approving authority, we could definitely change that in the regulations as drafted and present that in the final draft to city council. As far as the de novo vote to bring it back out, that was the one thing that we kind of saw as if city council felt that the Planning Commission did not make the correct decision and their findings were wrong, then city council would be able to make a de novo vote and pull that official development plan up to their level for a review. Okay.
Well, and the reason I ask is it just seems inconsistent with the rest of our processes. So I was trying to understand why. Because, I'm curious in turn, if the operator said they got denied and they said, I disagree with the findings of the Planning Commission, could they then appeal that to City Council, or what is there a path for them?
I believe that their only path is to pursue us in district court after that. Specifically, it says any decision of the Planning Commission shall be final from that date. So this is very similar to the language that we use in our current city code for variances. The Planning Commission is the final authority on a variance being granted under either the sign code or the other development standards. And the only alleviance from the variance is for the party to sue the city in district court. So it's similar to that. We could adjust it so that way they could appeal to city council. It is something we could definitely craft.
I'm just curious from like a case in court, you know, what's a better case if it is rejected by the planning commission and then it has an opportunity to go to the council, and then council, you know, validates the planning commission's stance if that looks different in court. So I guess that's really a question for the legal minds. If you guys are comfortable with that, I'm just trying to understand the process and why it's a little bit different. I mean, I understand with the variance, I feel like that's kind of it's important to the person asking for the variance, but if you're talking about somebody trying to pull a permit to drill for oil, I imagine they're going to have some resources behind them. So one of the other things I'm curious about, and I know the mayor kind of spoke to this and it's throughout the presentation. So when this first came on my radar is what a lot of folks mentioned as far as the Rocky Flats and Stanley Lake potential drilling that happened a while back. And so I know that that was part of the reason that we started, or at least that was my understanding why we started evaluating this. But how would this have changed that situation? Because it sounds like maybe not much. Or am I misunderstanding what this does if they're doing that kind of underground drilling?
Yeah, so I believe you're referring to applications that were filed with the COGCC in the early fall of 2018, which I believe were mostly reactionary to a proposition that was on the ballot that year, specifically restricting oil and gas activities within 2,500 feet of lakes, rivers, and houses and such, which is why we think those applications were withdrawn. Under this new ordinance that we're proposing, it will not affect that application that was filed on Rocky Flats because we don't have authority over Rocky Flats. It would not allow the application that was filed on the west side of Stanley Lake, near kind of the near Alkire Street. And then there was also an application for a site within Westminster Hills open space, very close to Sims Street. That one would have been within the 1,000-foot setback, and so it would have had to locate further out in Westminster Hills open space under this draft regulation.
Okay, no, that's good to know. So that actually I understood wrong then, because I know those were our big concerns, were those ones because of our obviously wanting to protect our water supply. The last thing that I'm curious about, Councilor Voles had made a comment about the origin of the starting point of the variance in the 1,000-foot or distance. And there was a comment made about, you know, if it was from the building itself that potentially it could hit a playground. What are the other qualifications though that they could deny such a thing? I imagine, I mean, I understand wanting to make sure that we're adhering for things like a playground that's 1,000 feet away from a building, but is there other things that they could deny that over for public health and safety reasons?
Elizabeth, would you be able to answer that for other reasons of denial of an application?
Sure, and I'd also love to just build on Jacob's answer to the last question as well, if I can. So I'll start with your last question first. So the way that we've crafted the regulations, and the city can deny any application if it fails to meet the standards and criteria in the regulations. So an application needs to demonstrate that it can protect public health, safety, welfare, and the environment in order for it to be approved. So one grounds for denial would be if the operator wants to locate within your setback, for example. Another grounds for denial could simply be that the design of the facility, for example, doesn't adequately protect public health because the air emissions are going to be too significant, or the truck traffic will be too significant, or the operator has a history of non-compliance with state or local or federal rules and has demonstrated that they're simply not reliable, and therefore that is a grounds for denial. So there are multiple reasons why a local government can deny an oil and gas application in the current code. And just to build on Mr. Casca's answer related to the prior question. So in the state rules that are being finalized right now, the mission change rules, not only does the relevant local government, which in your hypothetical would be the local government that has jurisdiction over Rocky Flats, have a lot more ability to weigh in at the state permitting level and provide their input as to whether or not they're accepting of an oil and gas operation to the state when the state is issuing its permit. But also approximate local government now has multiple opportunities to consult with and coordinate with the COGCC when the COGCC is issuing a permit. An approximate local government is defined as one that's within 2,000 feet. The boundary of the local government is within 2,000 feet of a proposed oil and gas facility. So for example, if an operator wanted to put a well pad within 2,000 feet of the boundary of Westminster, the city of Westminster now has multiple opportunities to provide comments, consult with the COGCC, participate potentially in a hearing on when the COGCC is considering whether or not to grant or deny that particular permit. And so those rights that are new, I think, could change the calculus in your hypothetical or the situation that occurred previously in Westminster.
No, that's great information. I'm pretty comfortable with the recommendations that are being made because it sounds to me like most of the items that have come up, there's multiple layers where you could say, hey, this doesn't fit. So it's not just like this one thing, there's a loophole there. It sounds like it's pretty thorough as far as the things that people have to go through. My only big concern right now is the situation that we're in as far as the ability for people to give public comment. So this is, as my colleagues have said, a pretty hot button topic. And I would want to make sure that before we approve this, that there is a good opportunity for public review and public comment on this, because I think it's an important action that we're looking to take. So however we can make sure that, we go above and beyond to make sure that, people have access to this, they have ability to give us feedback before we actually do any kind of formal action on it. I would be interested in that. I also would put out to my colleagues, I would be interested to, your thoughts on the process as far as, are you all comfortable with it stopping at Planning Commission and not having a more consistent path with a lot of other things we do, where it goes to Planning Commission and to us. But for the majority, I'm very comfortable with what you guys have put forward. I know there's a lot of work that's been put into this, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, Council, before we go, I want to finish up with Councilor Smith, and we have opportunity to continue this discussion as a public comment, but we have 4 other long items, and if we spend all night on this one item, we're going to be here quite late. So if you've got comments that can be put in as part of the continuing resolution of this, well, please try to save those. If you think it's very important you do it now, we'll continue this, but you're going to be extending your hours tonight. Councilor Smith. We don't have any voice on you, Councilor Smith. Still nothing. Now try.
Can you hear me now?
Now we got you.
Okay. Feel like a Verizon commercial or a Sprint commercial. So just a couple quick questions. For the review fees, is that a typical amount that we charge for reviewing this type of application?
Jacob?
Yeah, Councilor Smith. So the fee that was in the ordinance or is currently in the ordinance is $1,000. That's actually more than any other fee unless you apply a certain amount of acreage to it as far as the development review. The $5,000 is matching what Broomfield has listed in their new ordinance.
Okay. My other quick question is that we don't typically, for land use applications, we don't typically go further than about 300 feet for notification. And while I really appreciate 2,640 feet, I've been bringing this up in the year that I've been on council, is further notification to not only applications such as this, but for applications with land use or any other thing that our residents need to know. I'm curious why we went 2,000. Is it just following Broomfield's suit that we went 2,640 feet? Or is that something that we could look to propose in future recommendations for all applications?
Yeah, Councilor Smith, Jacob Casa again. The current development application public notice distance is 300 feet. The city does, in certain occasions, increase that. For instance, the Buddhist temple proposal was 1,000 feet, I believe, that you guys reviewed last year, earlier this year. The 2,640 feet is specifically a copy off of Broomfield. Other municipalities like Adams County have also adopted it as well. The state has similar distances in some of their requirements. I think that there's the opportunity to change the public notice for other development applications. I know it's certainly a discussion amongst the public and Planning Commission, and it sounds like City Council as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Just to wrap up, I'm looking at these seem pretty straightforward and to the point, but I would like to go further into staff's recommendation as far as getting more input from our community. And I would like to entertain Councilor DeMott's thought as far as maybe getting that back to council for a final review after the Planning Commission's final recommendation. So I think it would seem consistent with what we've done in the past, and like to entertain that as an option for us. So thank you for your time.
All right, this will be the second go round. Mayor Pro Tem.
I'll be incredibly brief. I wanted to ask a question. I know that 181 does not specifically allow us to do a de facto ban or ban, but does it specifically prohibit us from doing one? Or is it just mute on it?
Ms. Paranos?
So, sure. The language of the bill does not specifically, explicitly prohibit bans. However, there is legislative history that certainly suggests that the drafters of the legislation did not intend for local governments, or the COGCC for that matter, to ban oil and gas development.
But those previous legislative intent, wasn't that prior to the change in mission and scope of COGCC to prioritize public health? And if we're determining setbacks based off of public health, would they be more defendable?
So the legislative history I'm referring to is during the drafting of SB 19181.
Okay, my apologies. Okay. I wanted to take a quick moment for anyone who's trying to take a quick poll of council. I do like the idea of noticing tenants in addition to owners. I think that's, and maybe something, as Councilor Smith just discussed with notification, I think similar expansion, maybe just in general, but I did like that comment by Councilor Voles. And then I do appreciate that staff is still evaluating the setbacks. And, you know, it would be my preference to go beyond the 1,000, closer to our neighbor, Broomfield, you know, but I'm open to further discussion on the topic.
All right, Ms. Paranos, between you and Jacob, please consider the comments that have been provided by council tonight. I would ask you to look into one thing. I know on the abandoned well issue, where a company has become insolvent, there are state regulations about the state coming in and cleaning that up. Let's make sure that we're in compliance with that. The other one is federal regulations on the ability of the owner of minerals to be able to get to those minerals. I know we've been through a lawsuit or two with Rocky Flats that involved that we ended up losing big time on, from Rocky Flats trying to prevent a guy trying to get to mineral rights for oil and gravel. But those two, if you can look at those and take into heart the suggestions from a number of the council members, I'm not looking for polls. These are comments that are getting back. Please consider each comment carefully. But I also don't want us to get into a point where we're banning this by setting up a setback that would prevent them from being able to do that. I also like you to reconfirm one of the questions that came up about, is there a depth? I don't think there is that we can regulate, but just to validate that that is or isn't something that's in there. Ms.
Certainly,
Brown,
Mr. Mayor.
thank you. All right, thank you for being here tonight. Jacob, thank you for your time. Council, let's move to the next item. Mr. Frankel, you have a question or a comment?
I do have a question, Mr. Mayor, if I could. I think staff might benefit from some direction regarding the drafting choices that are available on the pathway that these applications would follow. So if council prefers that the applications go to Planning Commission for a recommendation and then to City Council for the final decision, it can be drafted that way. If council is comfortable with it going to the Planning Commission and having that be the final decision, subject to court review, that's an option too. But if there's a preference one way or the other, I think it would be helpful to let staff know which your preference is.
Well, Mr. Frankel, my assertion of watching the council reactions to that, I think the preference is going to be that the Planning Commission is the recommending authority, not the decision authority. And if there's anyone on the council that objects to that, wave your hand or something so I can see it. But I think at least the majority of council would be more comfortable if the final recommendation or decision was with the council, not with the board or commission. I know the only other exception I'm aware of it, that is the Permits and License Board, where their decision, if we don't like it, we can't even appeal it. We have to send it to district court.
Thank you. I appreciate the direction.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Tripp, what's up next? And we'll try to get as many of these done tonight as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have the sustainability report, something that has been greatly awaited for some time. And I'll ask Deputy City Manager Jody Andrews to come on and introduce this subject.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Jody Andrews here, Deputy City Manager. Tonight we have a brief presentation by staff presented by the city's Chief Sustainability Officer, Paul Schmeeken. He will walk through the status update, where we are on the plan, and talk about next steps as well. This draft before you tonight is the city's first ever sustainability plan, and it provides a strategic framework for the city to achieve its vision statement, which includes a focus on sustainability. It is a framework that will yield economic, social, and environmental benefits for the Westminster community, and will result in many cases actually in cost savings for our residents and businesses. And Mr. Schmeeken is available tonight to answer any questions around the draft plan and take any further direction from City Council. The work began on the plan in earnest in the summer of 2018, and you may recall that the first draft of this plan was brought to City Council in the summer of 2020, so this summer. We received some feedback from City Council and direction, and that's now been incorporated in the draft that you see before you tonight, which is the second draft of the plan. And it has also gone before the city's Environmental Advisory Board and our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Board. And both of those reviews with those boards went well, and we received some great feedback from those groups. So the next steps will also be outlined by Mr. Schmeeken really tonight with the receipt of the second draft and further feedback and direction from City Council. It also marks the beginning of a broader public engagement on this plan, so that it will get distributed to our public broadly, and we will welcome feedback for quite an extended period of time on this draft. So having said that as an introduction, I will now turn it over to Mr. Schmeeken to provide the presentation on tonight's plan.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Mr. Andrews said, I will be presenting the overview of the sustainability plan. Before I do that, I want to introduce somebody else on the call. Shelby Summers from the Brendel Group is on the call. She was our consultant that helped us pretty much develop the sustainability plan. Brendel Group is from Fort Collins, and they have extensive experience in sustainability planning. So next slide, please. So as Mr. Andrews said, the process started a little while ago, but the foundational element should look very familiar to council because it is based on the city's vision that we need to be a sustainable and inclusive city. So this pretty much set the tone for the development of the plan. And then drilling down a little bit further into the strategic plan, the issue of being a beautiful, desirable, safe, and environmentally responsible city, making a citywide commitment to sustainability. And then one of the objectives that was underneath that was to develop a sustainability plan, the first ever sustainability plan for the city of Westminster. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of context. We always get into this issue of how do we define sustainability. The classic definition is on the diagram at the left. And really that curvy triangle in the middle of the Venn diagram is that sweet spot that we try to hit with sustainability, where we're simultaneously accomplishing environmental benefits, economic and community and equity benefits. And so really a lot of what we do, a lot of what you will see in the plan are really projects and programs that have economic, community, and environmental benefits. So we try to hit all three of those at the same time with the projects that we work on. And if not all three of them, 2 out of 3 is pretty good too. Really the whole point of this though is how do we make Westminster an even better place to live, work, visit, and play. Next slide, please. And just a little bit of context to go back a little bit broader. So Westminster Forward is really the umbrella concept that the sustainability plan lives under, along with a lot of the other plans that you've heard about. So Westminster Forward is really a coordinated community engagement process that really supports all of these planning processes. And we want to make sure that all these plans are speaking to one another, that they're aligned, that we are kind of supporting one another as we develop each of these plans over the next year or so. And of course, there's the comprehensive plan, the future parks, recreation, and libraries plan, the sustainability plan, transportation mobility, and then 2 kind of side projects related to the Unified Development Code and then the water supply plan. So the sustainability plan fits within all of these. Back in February of 2020, there was an information-only item to council that talked about the public engagement that went around the whole Westminster Forward process. And some of you might have remembered the things that we had done in 2019 with Harvest Fest and Movies in the Park and Latino Fest and a whole series of other engagement tools we use to gather information from the community that would help form the development of each of these plans. Next slide. So let me give a kind of an overview of the sustainability plan and how we approach the development of it. This really is a practical multi-year strategic plan. And I want to emphasize that this is not a 2-year plan. It is closer to a 6 to 7 to 8 year plan. And so we want to think about it in a little bit longer term, and that's why it's strategic. We also want to think of it as a living plan that we can be opportunistic when new issues pop up, when new resources come available to us through grants or federal or state money, that we can modify this as need be and make it a living plan. And I think we've seen in the last 6 to 8 months with the global pandemic that we need to be very flexible and adaptive in the way that we do a lot of our planning. And so that's really one of the key elements behind the sustainability plan. The actions in the plan are also based on community input and also subject matter experts. And it's not just city subject matter experts. I mean, Brendel Group and myself have reviewed a lot of other city sustainability plans in Colorado and around the country. And we've kind of grabbed a number of those actions that we think are quite reasonable for Westminster. And they also kind of push the envelope where we can. The actions of the plan we know can be implemented, and they're also financially feasible. In fact, we really want to emphasize the bang for the buck in our work and also return on investment in a number of the projects that we do. As mentioned, promotes best accepted best practices in the field, but again, with that Westminster-centric focus on the plan, on the actions. So we want to make sure that the community can engage in these issues, that they support them, and that city operations can actually implement this work. The next key point is that we want to create partnerships to accomplish the plans. City only has so many resources. It's a large community. We can only get this done if we create partnerships with nonprofits and other utilities and state government. And that's the only way we're going to get these actions done. And then the other key point about this partnership issue is that we want to leverage resources from other partners. I mean, Xcel Energy will have far more resources than we ever will to deal with energy efficiency issues and promoting renewable energy. And so this is a pretty key issue that we're not only talking about what resources we have, but more importantly, resources that other partners are bringing to the table on this. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of process as far as how do we get here. Again, we hired a consultant. The very first thing they did was that they developed a state of sustainability report. And this is really a foundational document that they developed based on a lot of discussions and internal reviews, internal interviews, and best practices reviews from around the country in Colorado, and developed this report that kind of identified a whole series of issues that we could be looking at in the city, some gaps maybe that we have that we could work on. And then this foundational report really set the tone for the working group that really developed the draft plan. So we assembled a working group about 1.5 years ago, and it was comprised of 14 community members and 12 staff. And 4 of those community members came from 4 of our boards: Parks Board, EAB, Inclusivity, and Planning Commission. And then for about a 3 to 4 month period of time, these folks met about 3 times, and they had a lot of homework in between. And they really developed the draft plan, the kind of the key components that you see in the document before you. At the same time, we were also doing a lot of the Westminster Forward engagement. So we had the working group kind of working actively on drafting the plan. We also had a lot of simultaneous public engagement going on, and there was a lot of great kind of synergy with the information that we kind of fed information from the Westminster Forward process into the working group. And they finished their work probably about 1 year ago. And then following that, we gathered a number of internal staff, and we kind of worked through all the different proposals and then kind of came up with the final document that you see. So staff considered things like resource availability and staff time, and is this possible? Can we do it this year? Can we do it in 5 years? And so based on this whole process, we are now at that stage where we have kind of the second version 2.0, as we're calling it, of the sustainability plan. Next slide. And then the basic content is 7 theme areas, and then these 5 cross-cutting issues. And these 7 theme areas were partly developed in discussion with the other Westminster Forward plans. And so you're going to see some similar themes among the different plans, the comp plan, the parks plan, transportation plan. And so we felt like these were kind of good categories that this community care about, and that we felt like we could make some significant progress on. And then the 5 cross-cutting issues, they really touch on all 7 of the themes. So just climate, for example, climate has elements in all 7 of the themes: economic resilience, energy, environment, natural resources. And the same with resilience, the same with safety, equity, and education. And so this is really the way that we structured the sustainability plan. I think it's working well. I think we found a lot of the issues that the community brought up fit well within one of these categories. So we could easily kind of hone in on this framework and then make it work for a lot of different issues. Next slide. So I'm going to touch just briefly on the next 4 slides because these are just some examples of the targets that are contained within the plan. And what I want to emphasize on these next 4 slides are a few things. You're going to see an example of qualitative and quantitative measures. So some of the measures have a target with a date. Others have more of a directional approach to it, like decrease or increase. So on energy, you're going to see the pursue opportunities to decrease energy costs. Whereas the next one, we were able to put a target on it because we track that data and we measure it regularly. The other piece about the targets is that we want to make sure that a lot of the work we do hits on that economic component of sustainability, that we're saving money for businesses and that we're saving money for residents. And so kind of that second box under economic resilience, we're looking at different ways that we can work with the business community to help them save money, typically through energy conservation, water conservation, and waste management. Next slide. So the second box under health and wellness is also important because this is really about collaborating with others, because clearly the city of Westminster doesn't control regional air quality, but we need to collaborate with surrounding cities, the state government, regional entities to really focus on collectively solving this issue of regional air quality. And so you see that partnership, that regional collaboration throughout the plan in a number of different places. The other piece that I want to emphasize again is kind of this issue of affordability. So how can we work with kind of different city departments and again, partners to think about affordable housing and how we're going to work on that. Economic development has played a pretty big role in the development of this plan. And I think that's a key topic that we want to emphasize throughout this entire document, just this affordability issue. Next slide. So the, oops. One more slide. There we go. So something to emphasize in that second batch of boxes under the transportation mobility is that, and this gets back to the Westminster Forward issue, is that there are other planning processes underway, and we want to align the sustainability plan with the transportation plan, for example. We're probably about 3 or 4 months ahead of the transportation plan. And so we have some general statements, general targets in the sustainability plan related to transportation. When the transportation plan is completed and they have developed more specific targets, we'll go back and modify the sustainability plan and put in some of the more specific targets the transportation plan has identified. So we don't want to get ahead of them, but when they're finished with their work, we want to go back and update the sustainability plan to reflect what they've done. So that gets to the living plan idea. Next slide. And then the last one is on environment and natural resources. Just one more slide. There we go. So one of the other issues that is pretty key is public health. And this came up in an earlier slide with regional air quality. It also comes up again under the second bullet, improve the health of the community's waterways. So that's public health issues, but there's also environmental health issues. And so you're going to see that again throughout the entire plan. I think the final point I want to make on the targets is that what this does is it really sets us up to be able to do a dashboard for the city to show our progress. And one of the things that we will be doing 1 year after we complete the plan is develop a community dashboard that lets the public know how we're doing on these different areas. And the other thing I'll mention is that, yes, there are a number of targets that don't have metrics, but over time we might be able to come up with metrics just depending on what we know and what data sets we have. So I think we're really looking to report on how we do, how our progress is working, and both qualitatively and quantitatively. Next slide. So the next slide is what's next. So we already have a website launched as of today that really starts to collect feedback and present the plan to the public. So all the different plans, the summary documents that you've seen, they are on that website. There's also a feedback form on the website. And now that we have that, that pretty much launches this public engagement process. And we're going to be doing a variety of things. And I think we're still trying to figure out, given COVID protocol and social distancing, how we're going to be able to do in person, which is just not quite possible, but maybe it'll be possible in 2 months. And so we're going to be using social media. We're going to be doing online surveys. We'll do a virtual, at least one virtual town hall coming up, kind of similar to what the water efficiency plan had done. So we're looking at a whole variety of different community feedback mechanisms. We'll be available to do virtual presentations similar to what you're seeing. If an HOA wants a presentation, we'll do a presentation. So we're going to get the word out and do what we can to kind of present the plan to the public and not just have it on a website and tell people to go look at a website. So again, we've got a number of good ideas, but we're still working on that. We're going to aim to end the public comment period probably around the end of January, but that's always flexible depending on how things develop. And so we're aiming for a final plan developed based on all the public comments sometime in February, maybe early March. Following that, council will receive the final plan. We don't know a date yet because schedules are pretty flexible. And then, as I mentioned, we'll start doing reporting. 1 year out from finishing the sustainability plan, we'll produce a dashboard with kind of the progress report on the sustainability plan. And with that, you can go to the next slide, but I'll be happy to take any questions at this time.
Council, have anyone that has a question right now? Mayor Pro Tem Sykes, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schmeeken, and everyone who assisted on this. I believe Shelby, I think I heard was the name, but I cannot recall the last name from the Brendel group. And for the 14 community members who also participated. This has been a long time coming, and I really think that this is a great first step. I appreciate that it's practical, but also kind of long-term thinking. And I really appreciate the comments that this is a living document and will respond to the will of our community and the needs of our community in addition to opportunities that we may have. One thing that I'm always impressed with Westminster is how incredibly innovative and driven and capable we are as an organization when we set our mind to something. And I really hope that sustainability is not seen just as a greenie thing, but really seen as a way to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our residents today and tomorrow, and not focusing so much on one area that it's at the expense of the other two. So just thank you for your work on this. I'm going to continue to push to go towards the edge of what we can accomplish because I have so much faith in the ROI for our community. So thank you.
Councilor Vols.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to thank our Chief Sustainability Officer, Paul Schmeeken, and our Deputy City Manager, Jody Andrews, for just a ton of work shepherding this through, and then all the staff who've been involved. This is very exciting. This happened before I started on staff, or I mean, before I started on City Council. But I think this is very exciting. This is our first ever sustainability plan for our city. I think it's a giant step, and I commend council members, Mayor Pro Tem Sykes, the mayor, others who are involved in this, Councilor Scully Councilor DeMott, before I got involved. And this is an exciting development. So I'm excited about this being something we're moving forward on, and I look forward to that. I'm also very thankful you reached out to boards and commissions, and I would just say expand that even more. If each board and commission member who volunteer their time and talents for our city, maybe take their input, let them know this is available for public comment, and beyond the Parks and Rec and Planning Commission and the other one that you mentioned. I have been a longtime advocate for partnerships, and that public-private partnerships. My time on council, I pushed it a lot, and I'm very much an advocate for that. However, in this case, I don't want the entire plan to be built on partnerships. I think we need to be innovative and push the boundary and be out there as much as we can in addition to the partnership. So I just want to make that one comment, and thank you for everyone working on this. And I look forward to seeing it move forward. Thank you.
Councilor Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too want to thank the staff, especially Paul Schmieken and Jody, I'm sorry, Deputy City Manager Jody Andrews, and Shelby. And Shelby, I apologize. I also did not catch your last name. But this is good work, and I'm very impressed. I am a huge advocate of planning, and I'm a planner myself. I like to organize and think out what's coming in the future, and how do we plan for that future. And what I love about this is, and I think I've said that I've pushed through when I was running, I really advocated for not a 5-year plan, but a long-term vision for our city that residents could really hold on to and understand. And I think this sustainability plan really embraces that vision and that spirit. And so I appreciate it. I was wondering if you could go back to the slide that has the 7 themes and the 5 cross parts. One more. Oh, a couple more.
One more.
There we go, right there. I really love the fact that education, equity, climate, resilience, and safety are a consideration in all of these 7 themes. You know, I'm a huge advocate for education and equity and climate, and certainly I am also an advocate for resilience and safety, but I love the fact that we are making sure that these cross-cutting issues are considered and embraced in everything we do and how we're thinking about our future as a community. So I really wanted to highlight this slide. I think it's a very good slide that really simplifies the process, but really brings home how we are looking at different parts of our city. Again, this is really good work. I love the idea of a dashboard to show progress and to show where we are in our sustainability and how we're moving forward. This is a living document, so I expect this document will change with time. That is the brilliance of having living documents, is that they can change, but usually they're also very neutral and can be interpreted to meet the times, the day of the times. So I appreciate all of that work. Again, I want to thank the residents, the 14 residents that gave so much time and effort to the planning of the sustainability plan. It is good work, and I think you have set the direction of our city on a good path, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilor Seymour, just so you have the correct name, it is Shelby Sommer.
See, now I don't have to say it because now everybody knows, so
yeah.
I don't have to cover myself. I want to give Mr. Schmeeking credit where every gathering where there seemed to be more than just a few residents of Westminster, he has been at the last couple of years. And so I've had an opportunity to visit with him through that period, even before I was on council. So the outreach has been there, so I appreciate that. And I do very much appreciate, because this is quite a packet, I very much want to thank staff for the executive summary. And so I do want to key in on an important part of this, because planning is important. Long-term planning is critical for a vision, especially from our standpoint. And so from a business standpoint, though, you have your base goals and needs that you need to meet for your ROI. And then you get those big WAG goals, and then you get really bodacious WAG goals. So in this case, we're referring to long-term aspirational goals. But I do have some concerns with these too, because it is about partnerships and those things that we can control. But it's important to which direction we're taking those. I'm specifically looking at the 4 long-term aspirational goals when we these are focused for our entire city, but not just our city government, way outside of our control. And so it may be aspirational for us in the city that we can control parts of these, but if we're looking at 100% of energy efficient and healthy homes, I understand those two concepts very well together because we've had some builders in the city make presentations on that too, is how do we make homes more efficient and healthy, but also to my concerns, and this is a concern I brought up when this was part of our vision statement, the most sustainable city in America. My question always and will continue to be, at what cost? And so at what cost, and you know, at a certain point, at what time frame too? And so we can put great goals on things, but how can those be driven down to every day on the street? And a couple of these goals basically are in a situation where, are we going to rebuild every home in Westminster when homes last on average in the United States 50, 60 years? Probably not. So I think we need to take a deeper look at that and say, okay, what is within our control along with our partners, and what is something that's completely out of control, out of our control, and how would we affect that? So are some of these going to happen in 50, 60 years? Possibly. Is that too far of a plan reach? I believe so. I think it gets out of our control. So I will continue to work through this plan and have some more specific comments before we get to the end of it. So thank you.
Councilor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's just that you're muted, but you know, honestly, Councilor Seymour, you hit my points that I wanted to bring up. The plan is great. Lots of great components to it, lots of great information, and I think this has really aggressive goals as far as where we want to be. Not that aggressive goals is a bad thing, but it can come at a hefty price tag. And I'm just specifically speaking to an area that I know very well, which is transportation. So I feel that while we have great goals and a great baseline as far as where we want to be, I think that we need to look at the bigger picture as far as what in the long term will this cost taxpayers, the city, for getting us to these goals. So not to belabor the point here, but just wanted to reiterate that those were my thoughts as well.
Any other comments from council? All right, Mr. Smeekin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Council.
Council, we're going to move down to item 4. This is on, we're going to modify the sequence here for a minute so we can get some people who need to be available to us. Going to move down to the discussion on the annual tap fee adjustment. Mr. Tripp, who's going to take this? Don, you're muted.
This is in the Deputy Opie's area, so between her and Max Kirschbaum, our Public Works Utilities Director. They'll introduce this subject and we'll all be available for questions.
City Council, thank you. This is Barbara Opie. I'm just going to turn this straight over to Director Kirschbaum. He can provide us an overview. This is a standard protocol. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, get some direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Opie. This is Max Kirschbaum, Public Works and Utilities. Primarily, we're ready to address any questions you may have. The tap fee annual adjustment that was presented to you in the packet lists a variety of possible options that you could act on this evening. The first of those being to allow the moving forward of the automatic 21 increases in tap fees as they are explained in the Westminster Municipal Code. If you were to choose that action, it would keep our tap fees current with construction cost changes. We use a construction cost indicator called the Engineering News Record, and it also accounts for the Metro Waste Reclamation District fees for our wastewater tap fees that go to Metro, to ensure that development pays appropriately on the tap fees for its impact to the utility infrastructure as it is added to the system. There are other options presented here as well that could include a deferral or an indefinite freeze, or to remove the language of the automatic increase of the tap fees from the municipal code altogether. I know there was at least one question concerning the proposal here is for a composite 2.3% increase that is calculated, as I said, based on the construction cost indicator, plus factoring in the Metro fees projected increase for 21. If there was a question about could it be more than the 2.3%, I would just think back to the rate and fee study that we performed in 2017 and 18, which included a cost of service study. And in that cost of service study, the conclusion was that the tap fees as they were, plus the annual adjustments that are indicated in the Westminster Municipal Code are appropriate, and they are equitable for development as they are stated, and that there could be potential legal challenges if we were to extend beyond that rate structure. So that's why we have set and followed the annual increases in the recent years to include that as being one of the recommendations before you tonight. At this point, I'll just point out that they do address both commercial activity as well as residential development activity, and the breakdown of those, if you wanted to look at the details for each one, are included as an attachment within this staff report. That's all I have in terms of introducing the topic. If you have any questions, we would be happy to entertain those.
Mr. Tripp, do you have any comments?
I would add, I think the only thing that I would add is that what's not been said is that we froze water rates this year because of the pandemic and the impact that the potential of raising those rates could have on individuals. Even though our ordinance currently permits me to raise these fees, I thought it was advisable to bring those to you and receive comment from you before we took that action. So that's why we're here tonight, is to get your feedback, and we'll certainly put these fee increases in place, but I wanted to make sure we had that conversation.
Councilor Seymour, I think you're first up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Tripp, for bringing this before council. I just wanted to state that I'm absolutely in favor of us maintaining the increases that we have on the books. And then Director Kirschbaum answered the question that I had too, as far as reasonable compared to the cost associated with that, and then in line with the service that we provide. That we want people to buy into our system and pay reasonable amount for those infrastructure they're already in place. So on this side, this is very different from freezing the water rates for our residents. This is a cost of doing business, and it is a reasonable increase and was in the books already, so it's anticipated. So I appreciate that, and I'm in favor of us continuing on this at the increase.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I believe Councilor Demont got his name in
Go
before.
through his, please go ahead
you
and
did?
ask.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. So I do have a series of questions. I have a little bit of heartburn. I was under the impression, and I apologize for my mismemory, that we were going to look at how we calculated the rate increases for tap fees, similar to what we chose to use, age and condition for our rates. I thought we were going to do a similar study to have a more appropriate number than just index the construction index on tap fees. Because to me, it made sound sense that we went from this index to actual age and condition with rates, because the cost of maintaining the system is bound by what the actual age and condition. It seems that when we're doing tap fees, a one-time fee for the impact, it should similarly be making sure that business pays its fair share, that development is paying its own way. And so for the same reasons that we were told the index was kind of arbitrary, I'm confused as to why it is adequate for the tap fee. Can someone please explain that to me?
Sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Sites, I don't recall a further request to look at how they were calculated. What I do recall, and maybe this addresses it, maybe it doesn't, please redirect me. Previously, there was prior to the change in the Westminster Municipal Code a couple of years ago, we were using the CPI as an indicator. At the time we did this cost of service study as part of the rate and fee study, we also moved to make a change to, rather than have it based on a consumer price index, that these charges that are reflective of water resources, the water infrastructure, sewer treatment and transport, and the actual connection fee would be based on a construction cost indicator, not a consumer price indicator. That's what I recall. I'm not sure that I recall a revision beyond that. Maybe I'm not remembering correctly.
In 2018, when we agreed that, because we made that same change with rates, initially rates were based off of CPI, am I correct? The rate increases that were being predicted were based off of a percentage of CPI, or am I incorrect with that? And then we changed it to the consumer.
Yeah, I would say prior to 2016, that would be correct, that it was based more on a CPI, both for rates and for tap fees.
Correct. And then we switched in the interim as we were undertaking that multi-year study to understand the age and condition. We changed to the same index that we're now using for tap fees, correct? As an interim.
We are relying on construction cost indicator, yes.
I apologize, I'm not being clear. I'm right now talking about the rates, what we based historically going back prior. They were based off of a factor from CPI. Then I thought we went to the construction index while we were waiting for the results of the age and condition study. And then we had rates that really had higher level of fidelity because we understood the needs of our system and changed rates to meet that need. Is that the correct timeline on what we did with rates?
Yes, that's a correct path for rates. That's right.
Okay. And so what I'm trying to understand is why we would halt that same process on tap fees at the construction index and not want to go further into understanding the true impact on our system. So just like there's more fidelity in our rates, there would be more fidelity in the cost that we're charging for tap fees, so that business development is paying its own way and is not being subsidized by ratepayers. That, I guess that's the question. I was under the presumption, and apparently either I didn't ask my question clearly back in 2018, or I'm misremembering that I did, but I thought I had asked if we were going to have a similar exploration on how we evaluated tap fees.
I may be mistaken. My recollection of the cost of service study as part of the rate and fee study, there was the conclusion from that in that report was that the tap fees were being assessed at an appropriate rate, and that the changes that we introduced at that time to put the ENR construction cost increase into the Westminster Municipal Code would allow those changes from that point forward that would be appropriate to add to the tap fee. Maybe I'm missing something. I apologize if I'm not following here, but that's my recollection of it.
Mr. Tripp, did you want to say something?
I think what I'm hearing is that we made an adjustment to the tap fees, or would have made an adjustment to the tap fees had the cost of service study said to us that the fees were out of line. And instead of that, Max, if I'm correctly understanding and remembering, is that the cost of service study actually reinforced the fee, and then prospectively, to keep that fee in line with construction costs, we began using the construction cost indicator. So I think that's where we are, but we can certainly study that more, and I guess we can assess as to whether there's additional study that would do a better job of keeping up now that since we were current, if we could keep up with that through a different piece of information than the CCI. But I think that's maybe that helps put kind of a loop on all that information.
Well, so it's my impression, and it's been the discussion of many of our residents, that people want, in general, they don't want to be punitive. They still want good development in our community, but they do have the expectation that development will pay its own way. And our charter actually discusses that. So like in section 11.5.1 of our charter, the last paragraph says this section shall be liberally construed to accomplish its purpose of requiring new development, not current citizens, to bear the proportionate share of costs of benefits of public improvements and facilities reasonably necessitated by growth, mitigating the adverse effect of land development, and promoting coordinated, innovative, high-quality planning to produce a well-balanced, technologically advanced city. The portion that we always reference in regards to rates needing to be set to pay for operation also says charges. So in utility finance in 14.6, it says the rates and charges for any municipal public utility for the furnishing of water or sewage and rubbish, all of the different potential utilities, shall be so fixed as to at least meet all the operating and utility costs. So I guess I'm struggling with the fact that we've had our residents that are going to have to pay these higher rates in perpetuity, such a high increase, whereas with tap fees, which are a one-time fee, such a low increase. And so I am trying to understand the delta between the two, because these are the two ways that we fund our system.
First of all, let me say this. I think what I heard Max say, and what I understand to be the case, is that the developers and the tap fee are in fact paying the cost of that work, and that it's not being subsidized by the ratepayer. That's what I heard. That's what I believe to be the case. So when the study the cost of service study determined that the fee that was charged at that time was appropriate, then the next question was, how do we keep that up to date moving forward? The decision was made to use the construction index versus the CPI because it would be more comparable to what's happening in the industry. It may be possible to look at that again, to do that cost of service study again after 4 years now and see if we believe it kept up and if we think something more should be done with tap fees. And so I would suggest between that and making sure with the city attorney that we're in compliance with what the code requires, we maybe do both. But Mayor Pro Tem, I think that's how we end up today with the cost of service study establishing that we were meeting those requirements and it was paying its fair share, and then keeping that up to date through the construction index. But I'll conclude by saying we're certainly prepared to look at that further and update that cost of service study if we need to.
Well, perhaps if someone could jog my memory by sending me that portion of the cost of service study, that would be helpful, because what I do recall it saying was that our commercial our commercial ratepayers were paying more than their fair share. But I don't remember, and I apologize for not having a crystal clear memory on this. I don't recall it saying that our tap fees were adequate.
If I could,
I actually don't remember it being part of the conversation.
Mayor Pro Tem, you have a terrific recall for those things, so I'm not going to question it at all. I would ask Max if he would weigh in on this, but I would say respectively, we're willing to do whatever we need to do to provide assurance to people that developers are paying their fair share, because we really endeavor to do that.
yeah, the imbalance, I think, between commercial and residential is as it related to rates, not on the tap fee side. To quote just to pull a sentence from the cost of service study document, it indicates that tap fees cannot be used to pay for O&M expenses or the repair and restoration of existing or infrastructure facilities. So while we can't, that's the quote part, while we can't charge development for more than its fair share, we are able to charge for the offsite impacts to the system that would be a direct result or necessary for the success of the project. And in these last 2-year period, we have begun to do exactly that, where we are looking at the not only the on-site portions of impact to the system, but the off-site requirements as well. And we've done that at least once in the last 2-year period where that was appropriate. That might also be part of this same discussion.
I think it is, because my ultimate goal is ensuring that development's paying its own way, no more than they should, but definitely no less than they should. So I think that you have we've had 3 meetings trying to understand exactly all of the cost drivers on our system. We just had a conservation plan conversation that talked about one of the main drivers of expense in our utility is that the peak usage, right? So development directly relates to that and to the scale of what we have to build, water treatment, distribution, everything to. So while it may not pay for repair and replacement, it is impacting scale, which is a relevant factor, in my opinion, that is not encapsulated through an index, nor are one of the factors that the tap fees are covering are the cost of our water resources. And so water rates are not going up by 2.4% or 2.3% aggregate, so that's the thing, is I feel like it might not cover the actual cost drivers, and that's my concern. So I appreciate getting that information. I just want to make sure that the goal that I think is articulated in our charter of having development pay its fair share is appropriate to try to ensure.
Right.
We couldn't agree more. Thank you.
To exactly what you were just saying there, the example that I was referring to was a case within this last 2-year period where the development itself was going to required the upsizing of a specific length of sewer that was about a quarter to a half a mile away from the location. And for that project to be successful, that upsize was necessary, and that became part of the fees assessed to that development. So I think we have been doing that since this discussion in 2018.
Counselor Demott, you've back in the queue again.
Can you remind me when the city stopped doing the limiting the amount of taps they did with the, trying to think of the terminology that you use with the lottery, or however you guys used to do it before with the point system, and why that was done away with as far as managing growth?
You're referring to what used to be called the beauty contest?
I've heard it called that, yes.
That was determined, Councilor Demott, I want to say prior to 2016, if I recall, that we started using more valid measurement points than just what they got points for how pretty it looked, that there had to be more consistency with construction types and the quality than just the appearance. But I think it was back right around or prior to 2016.
That's what I was recollecting, and I understand like the different qualification changes. What I'm trying to understand is what was the impact to growth and the real impact to the system by changing that practice? I mean, did that allow for a substantial more amount of growth year over year after that change that caused more wear and tear on the system? And maybe that's a bigger question than tonight, but
Yeah,
something I'm curious about.
Councilor Demott, that's a fair question, and it's the one that everybody asks, that everybody wants to know. I think, I don't believe it has. In fact, I think it contributed to better policymaking prospectively to look at individual projects. What I'd like to do is go back. There was quite a document that was created that was background as to why we did that, made that decision at the time. I'd like to go back and get that for council, and then look at answering your question and come back with that if we could. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. The only other thing that I wanted to bring up, so I think this is an interesting topic, and obviously, water has been a main topic of mine since running. And I'm kind of in between, I think, in a lot of ways. In some ways, I totally hear what the Mayor Pro Tem is alluding to, and it feels in some ways inconsistent. But at the same time, I think I could see it the other way, where that cost gets passed on in way of housing costs to people who are trying to buy a home. And if I sit here and I think about it, I think about, we want an affordable city. So, I mean, it's complex because ultimately that could drive up housing costs in the city too, as people try to look for a new home here with the finite amount of space that we have left for single family home as it is. So I really need to put a lot more thought into it. I think this is an interesting conversation as far as the points that Mayor Pro Tem Seitz has brought up. And Councilor Seymour made some good valid points, I think, as well. So I'd be curious to hear some of the feedback as you look at what Mayor Pro Tem Seitz has asked you to look at.
Councilor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to agree with Mayor Pro Tem on her thoughts and points for the tap fees, because I thought in our past discussion with Heather Bergman, that was an option for council to delve in deeper as far as what that looked like on the structure, how it aligns with our resident rates, and just overall totality of the cost of the system and how it relates to paying for its own way. So I feel that in this sense, it's a little rushed as far as needing guidance from council on where we go with the 2021 structure. So not that I'm saying that I don't agree with increasing what's already set as what Councilor Seymour has said, because that was already on the books to do so. But it feels that I don't have enough information as far as how this in its entirety impacts all of our rates. And so I would like to see this, and I don't know if this is possible, is that I know that we have a 2021 coming up here in about a month and a half. Is there any possibility that, is there something that says this has to be a decision by January 1st, 2021? Or can we get more information, slow it down for a second, can we get more information and then make a decision come end of January 2021? Is that a possibility to work that structure, to kind of look more at this as a bigger picture?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Smith. I draw your attention to the presentation that Public Works and others created, and it provided you some options. The reason we're here tonight is that it would have proceeded to be enacted as a new fee if nothing had happened. So it was really a decision to say, this is a delicate, sensitive topic. We're in the middle of these conversations. It didn't feel to me like I should just proceed with that without talking to you. But you certainly have an option to defer. You have an option to commit to that fee immediately. You have an option to not enact the fee. Those are all options for you. And that's why we're here this evening. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Councilor Vols.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Tripp, for bringing this forward. But it does raise questions for me as well. I would support the increase, but I'm questioning whether it's enough. So I think Mayor Pro Tem Seitz raised some really good questions. Before I make a decision, I would like to see some more of that research. I also don't know that I have enough information to make a decision on that. I have a question, just trying to learn and trying to understand the fees in front of us in the charts. In attachment A, for single family homes, it's a 2.3% increase proposed for 2020 or over 2020, and that's the increase. And then for multifamily buildings, it's 2.0. And why would, so there, I'm sure there's a great reason, and I just don't know what it is. Why is there a difference between the 2.3 for single family and the multifamily 200 bedroom units? It's 2.0%.
Mr. Kirschbaum, you have any response?
The table you're looking at in the attachment A for both the construction cost and metro increases to residential development, it's the 2.0 is slightly less based on tap size and just scale, relative scale of an individual single family home versus the line here is for multifamily buildings. So it's a scale issue.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this is my first time to see a chart like this. So I would be interested in seeing more information on what Mayor Pro Tem Seitz asked earlier. Thank you.
Councilor Scully.
I think that my fellow counselors have summed up what I wanted to say, but I too would like to see the information that Mayor Pro Tem Seitz has requested. I too am concerned that the burden of paying for our system is falling solely really on our residents and not enough on other entities such as developers and commercial. And I know this is a long conversation. I know we've had some presentations that have also presented this information, but I want to make sure that our residents are not carrying all of the burden, that we are spreading that burden equitably across our system. So I too would be in favor of seeing the reports that Mayor Pro Tem Sites has requested. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? All right, Mr. Kirschbaum, this is where I think we're at. Mr. Tripp, there are several questions as to whether or not the proposed increases are sufficient enough to cover the cost. Is there an undue burden on one side or the other, being either residential or commercial, or to our ratepayers? And a couple of the other specifics that you can go back to, the comments and questions that came up. Do you have any kind of a concept of how soon you could have that material provided to the city council?
Mr. Mayor, I'd certainly like to first go back and take a look at the cost of service study. Perhaps the answers that are desired are pretty straightforward as they were described in that cost of service study. In that case, I think it could be a relatively short response time to you.
All right, what I'm trying to do is not to shove this into next year.
Yes, sir.
I think the developers and others deserve the ability to plan their projects and what they're going to be doing. So if there's a possibility of this, Mr. Tripp, let's getting us back on the calendar for the early part of next month. And that gives you time to also put the developers and builders on notice that we are considering a tap fee increase, and we'll have it finalized as soon as we can. But we want to make sure that we're all on the point that the system charges are being adequately distributed to the people who are building into the system, and that the cost is there. Because I truly understand all the depth and stuff that we went into several years ago about the lack of CPI keeping up with actual cost. And I think that has gotten us into trouble for a number of years. And the fact that we went through this new process greatly increased our ability to anticipate the true cost of construction versus what CPI was doing. Mayor Pro Tem Sites, you had a comment. We'll try to close this one out.
I do. Oh, I'm sorry. I just cut you off.
No, not at all. I'll make a concluding comment. I just want to make clear on what I believe we can do before the end of the year. Please, Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
Okay, and maybe we're thinking on the same track here. I was going to ask if there was any way to go forward with this cost increase and perhaps in the new year look to see if we could do a mid-year adjustment, if at all possible. I really do believe in providing clarity and transparency to those who want to invest in our community. But I think that this warrants a discussion because it is topical. We all want to make sure we don't get in a position where we're underfunding our utility and have to have drastic increases in the future.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, my comments are along the same lines. We're going to do the best job we can to provide you the background to make you feel comfortable that the fee is where it needs to be. We're going to do that as quickly as we can so you can make a decision. Then you're going to have an option as to whether you move ahead with the current fee that would be on the table, defer it all together until you get more information, or not do anything in 21. So I think the information we're going to provide you is going to make it clear for you as to whether you're comfortable taking that action, but you'll have a chance to take that action by the end of the year. And then you could defer it and come back and do it later on. As Councilor Smith has mentioned, maybe you get more information as a part of our further workshops. So I think we're on the same page here, and we'll bring back what we can easily research historically as soon as we can.
All right. Is there any other questions or comments from council? Otherwise, we're going to move on to the next item. It's partly about 20 till 10. Are you okay with continuing, or do any of you need a short bio? All right, seeing nothing, we'll go on. Mr. Tripp, let's try to get the legislative review done, and then we'll try to jump into COVID.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and members of council, we have a very short COVID report tonight. It's really just the data. So we'll go to the legislative review, and this is Assistant City Manager Chris Lindsay and his colleague, Teresa Boko. Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and councilors. Tonight, staff would like to review the proposed changes to the city's legislative policy statement, and the lobbying protocols. And I even believe we have some late-breaking legislative news this evening we would like to share. Leading this evening will be Teresa Boko, our policy and budget analyst, and our legislative advocacy program leader. Teresa, you can start right in.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem and councilors. Thank you for your time this evening. As Mr. Lindsay just recapped, we do just want to briefly discuss with you and review the legislative program, particularly the legislative policy statement and lobbying protocols for next year. As you'll recall, we do these every fall in preparation for next year's state legislative session. And we also would like to visit with you regarding the legislative event or reception and our current thoughts on that and receive direction from you. Alluding to what Mr. Lindsay talked about, we did receive information tonight, just so you all are aware, literally as we were on council this evening, that the governor is planning to call a special session to talk about COVID relief. The information we have is that will occur probably shortly after Thanksgiving. So we will continue to track that and provide information back to you as we gain more information regarding the details of that session as well. But we did want to apprise you of that. So if it pleases council, we would just like to go ahead and start with the legislative policy statement. There were approximately 14 edits or proposed changes from staff that are in the legislative policy statement. Certainly, I don't plan to restate all of them, but did want to check in with council and see if there were any questions about those, or if you generally are in favor of the suggested changes. And then we can also talk about any changes that you all might want to see to this particular document. Thank you.
Council, any comments? Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
I just wanted to say great work. I think you did a good job editing the document to capture a lot of the conversations council has had throughout the year in a variety of areas. You know, I am stopping myself. I had a few wordsmithing things and I'm not even going to bring them up. So out of respect to everybody's time. So.
Councilor Lowell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would support staff's recommendation to hold off until we know a little more about how we plan for the legislative meeting. I enjoy those immensely and they're fun and a good time, but right now we might want to hold off. So I would support your recommendation on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think basically on our current COVID restrictions, we're not having any meetings for a while. And I don't think the legislators are going to be, other than a few of them who meet in committee. The only potential would be if we did individual Zoom calls, but as a group, I think that would be even tougher to do, to try to get them together on a Zoom call or some kind like that based on their current calendars. Councilor DeMott.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to thank you for the clarification and add of the mental health services for peace officers. And I'm just curious, on that, if that could be expanded to all our first responders, because I mean, that's services that would benefit any of them in those lines of work, as far as firefighters, EMS, and police officers.
Councilor DeMott, this is Teresa Boko. We certainly can, and we can expand that definition to include first responders, peace officers, and other first responders. We would be happy to make that change if that's the consensus of council as well.
That hopefully my colleagues will support that, but aside from that, thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Is there any concern with the recommendation from Councilor DeMott, from anyone, to make sure we include all first responders, not just one group? Just everybody okay? All right. Ms. Boko, you have a joyous group.
We're happy to have that. We hope to get through this briefly. We know you've had a long evening. So we will go ahead and make that addition. And just to confirm, it sounds like you are all in agreement with the staff changes that we can proceed forward with those. Okay, thank you.
That's the impression I have. And the only thing that's left open is whether or not we will be able to physically meet with any of the legislators based on our COVID instructions from from our health departments, but their own desires to protect themselves as well.
Absolutely. So council, along those lines, what Mr. Lindsay and I would propose is that we continue to monitor the situation over the next couple of months and return to you in January as more information becomes available about what happens with the pandemic, what direction we receive, and just to keep you in the loop that we will do what we can to provide feasible options to you on that, but that we do feel it's premature, and we would just, like I said, come back in January to revisit this topic with you when we have more information.
I think that's acceptable because we're going to have some new members of the legislative group that we've never sat and talked to as a group. So it'd be better to let them have a little bit of time to get settled in.
Absolutely, and we agree with that as well. And then just briefly, moving to the lobbying protocols, we did have one suggested change in that document to reflect council's movement towards distinguishing how they take positions on different items. You'll see the particular language is that each official position will accurately indicate which council members voted in support of the position taken and those that voted against the position taken. So we want to receive direction from you if you would like to move forward with that change or leave the document in its current state. Thank you.
Teresa, I think we answered that during our council rules and policies that we just adopted recently, that on something like that where there is not a unanimous decision, that we will identify those who agreed and who did not.
Okay, then we will, thank you for confirming that, Mr. Mayor. We will include that in the statement, and then with the position papers, we will distinguish the vote for and in support of and in opposition to a particular statement. So with that in mind, those are all the topics that we had for you this evening, unless you wanted to provide further direction or comment for staff.
I think we're good right now. And Ms. Seitz had no problem.
Okay, thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Tripp, let's get our COVID and talk about something that has nothing but high praise and frivolity going with it. It won't be this.
I will invite Max Kirschbaum on to provide you an update of the data.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Tonight I have two slides I would plan to show you. If Jody, if you can advance to the next slide, please. Here is both the state, county, and Westminster case data, which is as has been tuned to the dial colors, and the first row shows the new cases per 100,000. You'll see this data, which is as of Friday of last week, shows the state at 820, Adams County 1165, Jefferson 753. I state those only to say if we compare those to today, I looked at those exact numbers just before this evening's study session, and the state has, as of today, so from Friday today, that state number is now 933. The Adams County number is now 1285, and the Jefferson County number is now 849. So they are clearly still rising at a similar pace and rate as they have been over the last few weeks. The the percent positives, Adams County is right around, still today, right around that 17% mark, slightly less actually. And Jefferson County is slightly higher at 11.9% as of today. And the state overall is at 12.5. So just where it was on Friday. If you look at the Westminster column on there, you'll see that pretty consistent on either side of the county line in Westminster. If we could go to the next slide. We had some discussion last week and you expressed some interest on additional hospitalization data. This is, the scale is a little, it came out on the slide a little smaller than I thought, but you can see that, again, as of the end of last week, the patients currently hospitalized is over 1,200. It was at about a 1,250 rate. And related to that, the ICU beds in use across the state is now approximately 85% ICU beds in use. Some of the regional hospitals are reporting a similar or slightly higher rate than that. So that gives a little bit of a snapshot on the changes with the rate of hospitalization. Again, just like the case data, it has been on a steady incline. That's all the data I have for you this evening, unless there are any questions.
Council, you have any questions? Councilor Demott?
I just wanted to thank Mr. Kirschbaum for adding this slide because I know I've been asking for this, so I appreciate seeing this.
Councilor Seymour?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, thanks to Mr. Kirschbaum for updating those numbers for us. And I do want to just publicly state, because I've had some public comments that I don't always agree with the governor, but I want to thank Governor Polis for pushing back, if that's the term that you would like to use, as far as a statewide lockdown. The business community cannot handle another lockdown. It would be similar to a dark, I hate to compare it to that. Let's say the catastrophic event that possibly got rid of the dinosaurs was actually the dark winter. And that's what this winter will be for our local business owners if we have another shutdown. And we are going to be shutting down the livelihood of people, their health and their prosperity, not just for them, but for their employees. We know that our residents have COVID fatigue, but put yourself in a place of a local small business owner. They've hit their max frustration level, and by having a general shutdown, we would also not exactly be getting to the root cause. So I want to thank Governor Polis for pushing back, and I appreciate his concern for our businesses also.
Other questions or comments on this? I remind council, I sent you a small update after my meeting the other day. We still have not gotten any update from the hospitals that they are not still restricted on transfer. It's my understanding of the 4 that I deal with, being Centura, Vista, Health One, and SCL. 3 out of the 4 cannot accept transfers because they're full. The other one, this was last Thursday, they only had 20% capacity left, and that was at Good Sam. So we're still running into the issue on certain hospitals are more impacted by others. As late as yesterday, I talked to the governor and some of his staff. Surge facilities, the problem is going to continue to be the same. They can physically open up a facility, but they don't have staff to put in it. All 4 of our serving hospital groups are understaffed and cannot get relief from other states because those folks are all being used in those states where they're at, where normally they would get travelers to come in. One hospital told me they were able to get 3 people out of Florida. That was the extent of what they could get. So the staffing of hospitals that are currently there, the ability to bring in more staffing, and any option to cut down the number of hours that hospitals are seeing their medical staff having to work is probably very unlikely. 2 of the hospitals told me last Thursday that they have patients who have been waiting in emergency rooms for 12 to 18 hours while they tried to find a bed at another hospital. This issue of staffing and space is not getting any better. It's getting a lot worse. Mr. Kurt Baum, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, sir, that covers it.
Okay, Mr. Tripp, do you have any other items that we need to cover other than the 5 that we've gone through tonight?
You don't. Good work. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and effort tonight.
Council, you had a lot to go through tonight. A lot of discussion. There's some stuff still to be done with. So at this point, it's 9:57. You are done 33 minutes early. So for those of you who are not home, go home and enjoy the rest of your night. We are adjourned.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good night, council.
Good night, all.